one of the world's most enduring cultures, boasts a history spanning over 3,000 years. This civilization arose from the fertile basins of the Yellow and Yangtze Rivers, two vital waterways that provided the geographical foundation for remarkable cultural continuity. The Yellow River, though infamous for its devastating floods, paradoxically nourished ancient settlements within its silt-rich valleys. The Yangtze, flowing through central regions, complemented this by creating an agricultural zone that would eventually unify with the northern territories, forming a cohesive cultural entity. This vast landmass was naturally protected and somewhat isolated by deserts to the north and west, towering mountain ranges like the Himalayas, and the Pacific Ocean to the east. This geographical seclusion fostered indigenous development largely independent of external influences for extended periods, allowing distinct cultural identities and political systems to evolve through several pivotal historical epochs. From the earliest agricultural communities to the sophisticated imperial dynasties, this history consistently demonstrates remarkable continuity, despite periods of fragmentation and upheaval. The successive transformations from tribal confederations to centralized empires established enduring patterns of governance, philosophy, and social organization that would profoundly influence East Asia and beyond for millennia. Geography played a crucial role in shaping early settlements. The Yellow River Valley, with its exceptionally fertile lush soil, served as the primary cradle for early development. This river system, originating in the Tibetan Plateau and flowing eastward across the northern plains, created a natural corridor for human migration and settlement. The periodic floods deposited nutrient-rich silt across the North China Plain, creating ideal conditions for early agriculture while simultaneously posing existential threats to the communities along its banks. The surrounding topographical features formed both protective barriers and developmental challenges. Northern regions bordered the vast Gobi Desert and Mongolian grasslands, which partially shielded agricultural communities from nomadic incursions but also facilitated cultural exchange. Western territories were characterized by mountainous terrain, which fostered distinct local traditions before their gradual integration into broader cultural patterns. The eastern coastlines offered access to maritime resources and eventual contact with the Korean and Japanese archipelagos, though seafaring developed relatively later compared to riverine transportation networks. Southern frontiers, with their subtropical forests and mountain ranges, supported different agricultural patterns and cultural practices than the northern heartlands, contributing valuable diversity to the emerging cultural synthesis. This geographical diversity led to regional variations in development. The northern plains specialized in drought-resistant millet cultivation, animal husbandry, and defensive military organizations against steppe peoples. Central regions along the lower Yellow River developed intensive agriculture, supporting dense populations and early urban centers. Southern territories evolved wet rice cultivation techniques, which required sophisticated irrigation systems and produced higher yields per acre than northern grain crops. These regional specializations created complementary economic zones that would eventually integrate through political unification and infrastructure development. The natural resources distributed throughout these territories provided essential materials for technological advancement. Accessible clay deposits facilitated sophisticated pottery traditions, evolving from utilitarian storage vessels to ritual objects and artistic expressions. Forest resources supplied building materials, fuel, and raw materials for tools and implements. Rivers offered transportation corridors, irrigation sources, and aquatic food resources, supplementing land-based agriculture. Such concentrated resource availability in accessible areas facilitated the technological sophistication necessary for complex social organization. The northeastern plains contain particularly rich mineral deposits, including copper and tin, essential for bronze metallurgy, which would transform military capabilities and ritual practices in early state formation. Southern regions produced distinctive resources like lacquer, silk, and various medicinal plants that became valuable trade commodities. Western mountains supplied jade, valued more than gold for its spiritual associations and aesthetic qualities. These resource distributions encouraged interregional trade networks, fostering cultural exchange alongside economic interaction. Geographic isolation proved perhaps the most significant factor shaping developmental patterns in ancient China. Substantial natural barriers, oceans, deserts, and mountains, limited external contact without entirely preventing it. Unlike Mesopotamia or the Mediterranean basin, which experienced constant interaction among multiple civilizational centers, the Yellow and Yangtze basins developed with relatively limited outside influence. This partial isolation allowed indigenous institutions, philosophical systems, writing methods, and cultural practices to evolve with remarkable continuity over millennia. When external influences did penetrate these natural barriers, such as Buddhism from India, military technologies from Central Asia, or administrative techniques from conquered peoples, they underwent thorough transformation and indigenization rather than supplanting native traditions. This pattern of selective adaptation within continuous cultural development would characterize historical progression through subsequent millennia, with foreign elements incorporated into existing frameworks rather than displacing them. The archaeological record of human activity in China stretches back approximately 100,000 years. Paleolithic sites contain stone tools, evidence of controlled fire use, and early artistic expressions, including carved bone fragments. Gradual technological evolution through the Paleolithic era laid the foundation for more rapid development during the Neolithic Revolution, when settled agriculture transformed human social organization around 10,000 years ago. This momentous transition from a nomadic hunter-gatherer existence to settled agricultural communities fundamentally altered social structures, technological development, and cultural possibilities. Archaeological evidence from numerous sites throughout the major valley systems documents this transformation through changes in settlement patterns, tool design, pottery styles, and burial practices. The process unfolded gradually over several millennia, with different regions adopting agricultural practices at varying rates depending on local environmental conditions. Northern territories witnessed early millet domestication beginning approximately 10,000 years ago. The Sis Han and Paleogang cultures, dating from the 8th millennium BC, show clear evidence of millet cultivation, permanent dwellings, storage facilities, and specialized tools for agricultural production. Millet provided an ideal staple crop for semi-arid northern conditions, requiring minimal water while producing reliable harvests in poor soil conditions. This adaptability enabled agricultural communities to thrive in regions where other crops would have failed, establishing the demographic foundation for subsequent cultural development. Southern regions followed a different agricultural trajectory centered on rice cultivation. By at least the 7th millennium BC, communities along the Yangtze had developed a sophisticated understanding of rice agriculture, as evidenced at sites like Hemudu in Zhejiang province. These early rice cultivating societies developed distinctive technologies, including specialized bone tools for harvesting, wooden implements for field preparation, and advanced water management systems essential for paddy cultivation. Rice production, though requiring more intensive labor and complex irrigation than millet farming, yielded significantly greater nutritional output per acre, supporting denser populations than northern grain agriculture. This agricultural divergence between northern and southern territories, centered on millet and rice respectively, established enduring regional characteristics that would persist throughout historical development. The different requirements and yields of these staple crops influenced everything from population density to social organization, labor systems to cultural practices. Despite these differences, both agricultural systems produced the crucial surplus necessary for social stratification, specialized labor, and eventual state formation. The transition to agricultural settlement triggered profound social transformations. Permanent villages replaced seasonal camps as reliable food supplies allowed year-round occupation of favorable locations. Early Neolithic settlements like Banpo, near modern Xi'an, demonstrate the emerging complexity of these agricultural communities. Archaeological excavation reveals specialized activity areas, defensive structures, communal buildings, and distinct residential zones, indicating social organization beyond simple family groups. Surrounded by protective ditches containing specialized workshops and communal burial grounds, these settlements exhibited early social stratification and collective organization. As agricultural production intensified through improved techniques and tool development, specialized labor became increasingly viable. No longer solely required to participate directly in food production, certain community members developed specialized skills in craft production, religious ritual, administrative coordination, and eventually military specialization. This division of labor, impossible in hunter-gatherer societies where virtually everyone participated in food acquisition, provided the foundation for increasingly complex social hierarchies and cultural elaboration. Material culture evolved rapidly during this period. Pottery production advanced from simple utilitarian vessels to increasingly sophisticated forms with distinctive regional styles. The Yangzhou culture, flourishing across the middle Yellow River Valley for approximately 2 millennia from the early 5th millennium BC, produced characteristic painted pottery featuring geometric designs and stylized animal motifs. These vessels, requiring substantial technical skill and artistic sensibility, demonstrate both regional identity and growing social complexity, with different vessel types serving specific ritual and utilitarian functions. The subsequent Longshan culture, emerging around the dawn of the 3rd millennium BC and lasting nearly 1,000 years, developed black pottery of extraordinary thinness and technical sophistication, often produced on early pottery wheels. These vessels, some with walls merely a millimeter thick, demonstrate remarkable technical mastery and specialized production beyond household manufacture. This era also witnessed the first extensive use of jade for ceremonial objects, indicating growing social stratification and ritual elaboration. Archaeological evidence from Longshan sites reveals substantial settlements with stamped earth fortifications, large public buildings, and status differentiation in burial practices. Population growth accelerated following agricultural intensification. By the late Neolithic period, substantial settlements housed thousands of inhabitants along major waterways. Lianzhou culture sites near modern Shanghai feature urban centers covering hundreds of acres, protected by sophisticated water control systems serving both defensive and agricultural purposes. This population concentration created the demographic foundation necessary for state formation and more complex social hierarchies. The agricultural surplus generated by farming communities ultimately enabled the emergence of ruling elites who claimed excess production through taxation or tribute, establishing the economic basis for early states. Cultural self-understanding begins with a series of legendary rulers known as the Five Emperors, whose stories blend myth and proto-history. Traditional texts, produced much later, present these cultural heroes: Huan Di, the Yellow Emperor; Yan Di, Emperor Ku, Emperor Yao, and Emperor Shun, as moral exemplars who established foundational elements through their virtuous rule and innovations. While archaeological evidence cannot verify these specific figures, the legends surrounding them reveal how later generations conceptualized their origins and political ideals. These accounts attribute various technological and cultural innovations to these legendary sovereigns. The Yellow Emperor supposedly invented writing, the compass, mathematical calculation, wheeled vehicles, and even silk production. Emperor Yao reportedly created the first calendar based on astronomical observation. Emperor Shun developed early musical systems tied to ritual performances and established administrative divisions, while clearly representing later projections rather than historical reality. These attributions demonstrate how cultural memory conceptualized progressive development through exemplary leadership rather than impersonal historical processes. More significant than specific inventions attributed to these figures were the political principles established in these foundation myths. The legendary emperors supposedly selected successors based on merit rather than hereditary succession, with Yao choosing Shun and Shun selecting Yu based on demonstrated virtue and administrative capability. This meritocratic principle, though frequently violated in actual practice, remained a powerful ideal throughout subsequent political history. The notion that legitimate authority derived from moral virtue rather than mere military power or hereditary right would profoundly influence political philosophy for millennia thereafter. The reign of Emperor Yao marks a transition in the legendary narrative toward more historically plausible accounts. According to traditional records, Yao confronted catastrophic flooding that threatened agricultural communities throughout the Central Plains. This environmental crisis, which some scholars have attempted to correlate with geological evidence of major flooding events around 2000 BC, provided the context for the achievements of the heroic figure Yu, who would become pivotal in legendary history. Yu the Great, tasked with controlling the devastating floodwaters, supposedly devoted 13 years to this monumental task. Unlike his predecessors who had attempted to block the flooding through dams, Yu pioneered a different approach, dredging channels, clearing riverways, and implementing water management systems that guided floodwaters rather than merely blocking them. This approach, working with natural forces rather than simply opposing them, became emblematic of sophisticated governance in subsequent political philosophy. The flood control achievement attributed to Yu represented the quintessential civilization-building act, transforming destructive natural forces into productive resources through human ingenuity, organizational capacity, and perseverance. His success led to his selection as successor following Emperor Shun, establishing the foundation for subsequent political development. Traditional historiography regards Yu as the founder of the first hereditary ruling house, the Xia, marking the transition from legendary sage kings to dynastic succession. Archaeological evidence cannot definitively confirm the existence of Yu or the Xia era as depicted in later texts. However, settlements dating to this approximate time frame, early 2nd millennium BC, show increasing social complexity, technological sophistication, and political centralization. The Urlitu culture, flourishing around 1900 to 1500 BC in the Central Plains, demonstrates characteristics consistent with early state formation, including monumental architecture, bronze metallurgy, specialized craft production, and apparent social stratification in residential patterns and burial practices. The legendary narrative surrounding Yu and his successors established foundational concepts in political thought that would influence subsequent millennia. The notion of the ruler as a moral exemplar rather than merely a superior force became central to political legitimacy. The connection between natural harmony and good governance created an enduring framework for understanding political authority as properly aligned with cosmic forces rather than opposed to them. The ideal of selecting leaders based on virtue and capability rather than birth status established a meritocratic principle that would compete with hereditary privilege throughout political history. These fundamental concepts, moral governance, harmony between human and natural realms, and meritocratic ideals, emerged from the formative period of early settlement and state development. They would continue to shape political philosophy throughout the imperial era and beyond, demonstrating remarkable conceptual continuity despite dramatic transformations in actual governance structures. This tension between enduring ideals and changing practical realities would characterize subsequent political development across millennia of historical evolution. Early cultural development also established patterns of thought that would profoundly influence intellectual history. The concept of correlative thinking, understanding phenomena through relationships rather than absolute categories, emerged during this formative period. Natural cycles, social relationships, and political structures were understood as interconnected rather than separate domains. This intellectual framework, differing significantly from Western analytical traditions that developed sharp distinctions between categories, would shape philosophical, scientific, and political thought throughout subsequent history. By approximately 2000 BC, The foundations for subsequent cultural development had been firmly established. Agricultural systems capable of producing reliable surpluses supported growing populations. Social stratification created specialized roles beyond food production. Technological innovations, including pottery, textiles, and early metallurgy, demonstrated increasing sophistication. Settlements grew in size and complexity, some showing characteristics of early urban development. Regional variations contributed diversity while sharing sufficient commonality to enable eventual cultural integration. These fundamental patterns, established during the formative period, would evolve through subsequent historical development while maintaining remarkable continuity in basic cultural orientation and social organization. The Xia era marks the crucial transition from legendary prehistory to historically documented state formation, spanning approximately from 2070 to 1600 BC. According to traditional accounts, Yu the Great established this first hereditary ruling line after successfully managing the catastrophic floods that had devastated agricultural communities. This pivotal development, this shift from merit-based succession to hereditary rule, initiated the dynastic political pattern that would characterize governance for millennia to come. Traditional historiography portrays Yu's decision to pass power to his son Shi instead of the most capable minister as a significant departure from previous practice. This transition reportedly faced opposition, with historical texts suggesting that Yi, a capable minister, initially challenged Shi's succession before ultimately suffering defeat. This struggle between hereditary privilege and meritocratic selection would resurface repeatedly throughout political history, creating tension between competing principles of legitimacy that subsequent philosophical traditions would attempt to reconcile. While textual sources describing the Xia derive from much later periods and contain clearly legendary elements, archaeological evidence from the early 2nd millennium BC reveals societal developments consistent with early state formation. The Erlitou culture, flourishing along the middle Yellow River Valley from approximately 1900 to 1500 BC, displayed characteristics many scholars associate with the semi-legendary Xia. Excavations at Erlitou reveal a substantial urban center near modern Luoyang, featuring palace complexes, craft workshops, and elite burials containing prestigious goods unavailable to ordinary community members. The Erlitou site demonstrates sophisticated urban planning beyond the capabilities of earlier Neolithic settlements. A large palatial complex covering approximately 12,000 square meters featured rammed earth foundations, timber superstructures, and specialized areas for different administrative functions. Surrounding residential zones show status differentiation in building size, construction quality, and material possessions. These archaeological findings suggest a stratified society with centralized authority capable of mobilizing substantial labor forces for monumental construction projects. Bronze technology emerged during this period, providing both practical advantages and prestigious symbols, reinforcing social hierarchy. Early bronze production required complex processes, including ore mining, charcoal preparation, furnace construction, and sophisticated casting techniques. These operations necessitated specialized knowledge, substantial resources, and coordinated labor beyond household production capabilities. The concentration of bronze objects in elite contexts suggests ruling groups controlled access to this prestigious material, reinforcing their elevated social position through exclusive possession of richly significant vessels and superior weapons. Erlitou bronzes, though less sophisticated than later examples, demonstrate impressive technical achievement for early metallurgy. Ritual vessels, including Zhou and Jia forms used in elite ceremonies, appear in high-status burials and palatial contexts. Bronze weapons, though still relatively rare compared to later periods, provided tangible military advantages through superior durability and effectiveness compared to stone or jade implements. The monopolization of bronze production and distribution likely reinforced the authority of rulers over subordinate populations and competing polities. Agricultural intensification supported these developments in political and social complexity. Archaeological evidence indicates expanded irrigation systems, increased use of animal traction for field preparation, and more efficient cultivation techniques during this period. These agricultural advances generated surplus production necessary for supporting specialized craft workers, administrative personnel, and ruling elites who did not directly participate in food production. Population growth followed these productivity increases, creating larger labor pools for construction projects and military campaigns. The political organization of early Xia, as reconstructed from archaeological evidence and later textual sources, likely consisted of a core territory under direct royal control, surrounded by affiliated regions acknowledging ritual supremacy without necessarily submitting to direct administrative oversight. This pattern, a directly governed center with decreasing authority toward peripheral regions, would characterize subsequent political formations for millennia. Regional variation in material culture during this period suggests considerable local autonomy within a shared cultural framework rather than uniform administration across extensive territories. Traditional accounts depict the Xia as eventually succumbing to internal corruption. The dynasty's final ruler, Jia, appears in historical texts as a paradigmatic tyrant whose moral failings triggered the loss of heavenly favor. According to the records of the Grand Historian, compiled during the Han era nearly 2 millennia after these events, Jia indulged in extravagant luxury, brutally punished critics, neglected administrative responsibilities, and ignored agricultural development vital to his subjects' welfare, whether historically accurate or serving as a moral exemplar. The narrative of Jia established an enduring pattern in historical writing. Ruling houses begin with virtuous founders but eventually succumb to corruption, justifying their replacement by more worthy successors. This conceptual framework provided ideological continuity across political discontinuities, allowing historical understanding to accommodate dynastic transitions without undermining the fundamental legitimacy of monarchical rule itself. The narrative pattern of virtuous founding, gradual corruption, and justified replacement would reappear throughout subsequent historiography, providing a moral framework for understanding political change that transcended mere power transitions. This interpretation allowed cultural continuity despite political disruption, an essential element in the remarkable durability of traditional cultural patterns across frequent regime changes. The Shang era emerged through military conquest of the Xia realm around 1600 BC, establishing a more extensively documented state initially centered at Zhengzhou and later at Anyang in modern Hunan province. Unlike the semi-legendary Xia, abundant archaeological evidence and contemporaneous written records verify the historical existence of the Shang state, providing much firmer ground for historical reconstruction. This period witnessed critical developments in political organization, religious practice, military technology, and most significantly, writing, the innovation that would prove most consequential for subsequent cultural development. Territorial control under Shang leadership expanded beyond the core regions of the earlier Xia state through military campaigns and political alliances. Shang influence extended across much of the North China Plain and into parts of the central Yangtze region. This territorial reach did not constitute a continuously administered empire in the modern sense. Rather, it comprised directly governed core territories surrounded by allied polities and tributary peripheral regions acknowledging Shang's supremacy without necessarily submitting to direct administrative control. Royal authority maintained this network through personal relationships with regional lords, military intimidation when necessary, and most importantly, religious authority derived from exclusive access to ancestral power and divine communication. Archaeological excavations at major Shang sites reveal sophisticated urban development. Early Shang capitals at Zhengzhou and Yanshi featured massive rammed earth fortifications enclosing substantial urban areas with specialized craft production zones, elite residential quarters, and ritual centers. The final Shang capital at Yinshi near modern Anyang, occupied from approximately 1250 to 1046 BC, covered over 30 square kilometers with multiple specialized districts for different activities. Royal palace temple complexes, elite residences, craft workshops producing bronze, jade, and bone objects, and extensive cemetery areas demonstrate complex social organization and administrative capability. The material remains at these sites indicate a tremendous capacity to mobilize labor for construction projects and maintain specialized artisans producing luxury goods. Rammed earth foundations for major structures required thousands of workers coordinated through sophisticated administrative systems. Elite tombs contained lavish grave goods, including bronze vessels, jade ornaments, pottery, and sacrificial victims, demonstrating extreme social stratification. Craft workshops show evidence of full-time specialization and standardized production techniques, suggesting centralized management rather than household-level manufacture. Shang material culture reached extraordinary sophistication, particularly in bronze metallurgy. Ritual bronze vessels from this period display technical mastery and artistic refinement beyond contemporaneous metalwork traditions elsewhere in the ancient world. These objects, cast using piece mold techniques requiring considerable technical knowledge, featured complex surface decorations, including animal masks, geometric patterns, and stylized natural forms. The largest examples, including square-shaped ding vessels with 4 legs, required coordinated effort from numerous craftsmen and substantial resources, including copper, tin, and massive quantities of charcoal for smelting. These bronze vessels served crucial ritual functions in ancestral worship ceremonies, central to Shang religious practice. Different vessel forms fulfilled specific purposes in elaborate sacrificial rituals: gui and zhu vessels for pouring wine libations, ding cauldrons for cooking sacrificial meat, and gu and yi containers for grain offerings. The possession of these prestigious objects, available only to the highest elites, both displayed status and enabled proper performance of religious obligations essential to maintaining cosmic order and ancestral favor. This fusion of political authority, religious obligation, and material display characterized elite culture throughout the Shang period. The most significant development of the Shang era was unquestionably the emergence of writing, representing a transformative innovation for cultural transmission and political administration. Oracle bone inscriptions, divination records carved onto animal bones and turtle shells, constitute the earliest substantial corpus of writing, dating primarily from the late Shang period, approximately 1250 to 1046 BC. These texts, numbering over 150,000 discovered fragments, document royal divinations concerning harvests, military campaigns, royal births, sacrificial activities, and other matters of state importance. The writing system already demonstrated considerable sophistication, with approximately 4,500 distinct characters identified, suggesting substantial earlier development not preserved in the archaeological record. These oracle bone inscriptions reveal the sophisticated administrative and religious practices of the Shang court. Professional diviners prepared bones or turtle shells by drilling a series of depressions, then applied heated bronze rods, causing characteristic crack patterns. The king interpreted these patterns as answers to specific queries posed to ancestral spirits, or the high god Di. Scribes recorded the questions, crack interpretations, and eventual outcomes on the bones themselves, creating an archival record of divine communication. This fusion of religious ritual, political decision-making, and textual recording characterized Shang governance at its highest levels. Shang governance centered on the divine authority of the king, who served as the primary intermediary between earthly and spiritual realms. Royal authority derived not merely from military power or administrative control but from the exclusive ability to communicate with royal ancestors who maintained influence over human affairs after death. This religious foundation for political legitimacy created dual obligations for Shang kings: effective administration of earthly domains and proper ritual service to ancestral spirits, whose favor ensured agricultural prosperity, military victory, and dynastic continuation. The king's primary ritual duty involved divination ceremonies, communicating with royal ancestors through oracle bones. These rituals addressed matters of state importance, including military expeditions against hostile peoples, agricultural forecasts, royal births and deaths, hunting expeditions, settlement foundation, and sacrificial schedules. The questions posed reveal central concerns of Shang governance. Will it rain? Should we attack the Gong farm? Will the king's toothache be relieved? Will this year's harvest be abundant? These divination records provide unparalleled insight into royal preoccupations and administrative priorities, unfiltered through later historical reinterpretation. Shang religion featured complex hierarchies of deities and ancestors. At the apex stood Di, a supreme deity controlling natural forces and human affairs, possibly evolving from an ancestral figure into a more abstract divinity. Below Di ranked the royal ancestors, who maintained posthumous influence over dynastic fortunes, requiring regular sacrifices to maintain their benevolence. Natural forces, including mountain spirits, river powers, and directional forces, occupied subordinate positions in this pantheon. The regular performance of sacrifices to these supernatural entities constituted a central royal obligation, establishing cosmic harmony through proper ritual observance. Archaeological evidence from royal tombs reveals elaborate burial practices involving human sacrifice on a substantial scale. Royal graves at Zibigang near Anyang contained hundreds of sacrificial victims accompanying deceased kings, retainers, servants, war captives, and sometimes royal family members slain to serve the monarch in the afterlife. These practices demonstrate both the extraordinary power wielded by Shang kings and a belief in a hierarchical afterlife mirroring earthly political structures. The massive investment in royal burial, involving immense labor expenditure and valuable material goods, reinforced monarchical prestige while ensuring proper transition of royal authority to the spirit world. Shang's society displayed significant social stratification. The king and royal lineage occupied the apex of this hierarchy, claiming both political authority and religious legitimacy. Below them ranked aristocratic lineages related to the royal house through marriage alliances or subsidiary branches. Military elites commanded armed forces and received rewards for successful campaigns. Specialized craftsmen produced luxury goods and maintained technical knowledge transmitted through apprenticeship systems. Peasant farmers constituted the vast majority of the population, producing the agricultural surplus that supported elite activities. At the bottom, slaves captured in military campaigns or reduced to servitude through debt performed menial labor, and sometimes accompanied elite masters in sacrificial death. The agricultural foundation of the economy relied primarily on millet cultivation in northern regions, supplemented by limited rice production in suitable southern territories. Farming communities utilized bronze tools for some agricultural operations, though stone and wood implements remained common for most tasks. Domestic animals, including pigs, dogs, sheep, and cattle, provided supplementary protein sources. Hunting expeditions, documented in oracle bone inscriptions as major royal activities, contributed additional meat to elite diets while demonstrating martial prowess. This agricultural system produced sufficient surplus to support substantial non-agricultural populations engaged in craft production, administrative activities, and military service. The Shang military demonstrated considerable sophistication compared to earlier periods. Written records and archaeological remains indicate organized forces capable of mounting expeditions against surrounding peoples whom oracle bones identify as Fang groups, non-Shang populations Pazan. Various threats or opportunities for expansion. Bronze weapons, including dagger axes, spearheads, arrowheads, and helmets, provided a technological advantage over less developed opponents. Compound bows reinforced with bone provided effective ranged weapons. Chariot technology, likely introduced from steppe regions to the north and west during the late Shang period, revolutionized warfare through increased mobility and shock value. These chariots, drawn by horses and carrying archer warriors, required substantial resources to construct and maintain. The vehicles themselves demanded sophisticated woodworking for wheels and chassis construction. Horses required breeding programs, training regimens, and specialized fodder production. Effective deployment necessitated trained drivers and warriors operating as coordinated units. These requirements limited chariot forces to an elite corps rather than mass deployment. But their battlefield impact proved significant nonetheless. Infantry armed with bronze weapons formed the bulk of Shang armies, with specialized units fulfilling different tactical roles in combat operations. Military campaigns served multiple strategic purposes beyond simple territorial expansion. Successful expeditions secured access to resources unavailable in core territories, such as particular woods, minerals, or animal products from peripheral regions. Campaigns against troublesome neighbors demonstrated royal power while securing buffer zones protecting agricultural heartlands. Captives taken during these operations supplied sacrificial victims for religious ceremonies and slave labor for construction projects. The martial prowess demonstrated through successful warfare reinforced royal prestige both amongst subordinate populations and neighboring polities, deterring potential challenges to Shang hegemony. The terminal decline of the Shang centered on the reign of its final king, known as Dixin, or King Zhou in traditional accounts. Historical narratives compiled centuries later portray him as a paradigmatic tyrant whose moral corruption paralleled that of the legendary Jia of Xia. According to these texts, King Zhou indulged in extraordinary excess, constructing lavish palaces, accumulating enormous harems, developing cruel punishments for opponents, and neglecting proper ritual observances essential to maintaining divine favor. While these accounts certainly contain legendary embellishments, archaeological evidence does suggest increasing social stratification and elite consumption during the late Shang period, possibly indicating systemic stress preceding political collapse. As central Shang authority declined under problematic leadership, the Zhou clan rose to prominence on the western frontier. Originally a semi-nomadic people from the Wei River Valley who had absorbed substantial cultural influences from the heartland, the Zhou served as a buffer state between Shang territories and western peoples. Under King Wen, this frontier polity gradually expanded territory and influence while maintaining nominal allegiance to the Shang king. After King Wen's death, his son King Wu continued methodical preparations against the Shang, building military capacity and forming alliances with other discontented vassal states. The decisive confrontation occurred at the Battle of Mai in the mid-11th century BC. According to traditional accounts, Zhou forces led by King Wu defeated the numerically superior Shang army through superior tactics, higher morale, and possibly climatic conditions favoring their approach. Historical records suggest that many Shang forces defected during the battle, indicating widespread dissatisfaction with King Zhou's rule, even among core supporters. Following this decisive defeat, tradition holds that King Zhou committed suicide by immolating himself in his burning palace rather than facing capture, an end befitting the dramatic narrative of dynastic transition constructed in later historiography. The successful Zhou conquest introduced a concept that would become one of the most influential political theories in subsequent history, the mandate of heaven. This doctrine, articulated in early Zhou pronouncements and later elaborated by Confucian philosophers, maintained that heaven granted the right to rule to those who demonstrated virtue and governed for the welfare of the people. When a dynasty declined into corruption and tyranny, heaven would withdraw its mandate and transfer it to a more worthy ruler who demonstrated proper virtue. This concept simultaneously legitimized the Zhou conquest of the Shang and established an enduring framework for understanding dynastic change as morally justified rather than merely resulting from superior military power. The mandate concept provided a philosophical resolution to the tension between stability and justifiable rebellion. By establishing moral virtue rather than hereditary status as the ultimate basis for legitimate rule, it allowed for dynastic change without undermining the fundamental legitimacy of monarchical government itself. Proper rule resulted in cosmic harmony, visible through agricultural prosperity, military success, and natural balance. Improper rule produced visible signs of heaven's displeasure through natural disasters, agricultural failures, and social disorder. This framework integrated natural phenomena, social conditions, and political legitimacy into a comprehensive theory that would influence political thought for millennia thereafter. The fall of the Shang thus established a paradigmatic pattern that would repeat throughout subsequent history. A ruling house founded by a virtuous leader would eventually decline under later successors who succumbed to moral corruption and luxury, justifying heaven's transfer of mandate to a new dynasty that would restore proper order. This conceptual framework provided ideological continuity despite political disruption, helping to maintain cultural coherence throughout cycles of dynastic rise and fall. The tension between continuity and change, between legitimacy and revolution, found resolution through this sophisticated political theology that accommodated change within stable theoretical parameters. The transition from Shang to Zhou, while representing significant political discontinuity, maintained remarkable cultural continuity. The Zhou adopted and adapted Shang ritual practices, bronze vessel types, divination methods, and administrative techniques while introducing innovations suited to their different circumstances. This pattern, revolutionary political change within evolutionary cultural development, would characterize subsequent dynastic transitions throughout imperial history. Each new ruling house claimed restoration of proper virtue after predecessor corruption, while simultaneously building upon accumulated cultural foundations rather than replacing them entirely. The archaeological record confirms substantial continuity across this political transition. Western Zhou bronze vessels maintained Shang decorative motifs while gradually introducing new forms and inscription practices. Burial customs evolved while preserving fundamental beliefs and ancestral influence, and status differentiation. Settlement patterns and architectural techniques displayed gradual modification rather than wholesale transformation. Most significantly, the writing system developed under the Shang continued with expansion and refinement rather than replacement, allowing textual transmission across political discontinuity, a crucial factor in the remarkable cultural continuity that would characterize subsequent historical development despite frequent political disruption. The Zhou triumph over the Shang around 1046 BC inaugurated a new political order destined to endure nominally for nearly 8 centuries despite profound transformations in its structure and authority. King Wu, leading his forces to victory at Mai, claimed not merely military superiority but moral legitimacy through the innovative concept of the mandate of heaven. This doctrine, articulated in early texts like the Book of Documents, asserted that celestial powers had withdrawn support from the corrupt Shang sovereign and bestowed it upon virtuous Zhou leadership. In a pronouncement attributed to the Duke of Zhou, this principle received its classic formulation: "Heaven sees as my people see. Heaven hears as my people hear." The mandate concept represented a sophisticated political innovation accomplishing multiple objectives simultaneously. First, it legitimized Zhou conquests despite their former status as a frontier vassal state without traditional claims to supreme authority. Second, it established a moral framework for rulership that transcended mere military power, linking political legitimacy to ethical governance rather than force alone. Third, it created a model for political succession that could accommodate discontinuity while maintaining ideological coherence. According to this doctrine, the right to rule was neither permanently guaranteed to any lineage nor acquired merely through military prowess. Rather, heaven bestowed authority based on demonstrated virtue and withdrew it when rulers became corrupt or neglected public welfare. This framework would prove remarkably adaptable throughout subsequent history. It simultaneously legitimized established authority by associating it with cosmic approval, while providing theoretical justification for rebellion against corrupt rule. The concept integrated political legitimacy, ethical governance, and natural harmony into a comprehensive worldview that explained historical change within coherent moral parameters. later philosophical schools, particularly Confucianism, would elaborate this basic concept into sophisticated political theories that shaped intellectual understanding of governance for 2 millennia thereafter. Shortly after his victory, King Wu established the Fengjian system of enfeoffment, granting territories to relatives and allies to secure control over former Shang domains. This systematic distribution of land created a decentralized governance structure often compared to European feudalism, though with distinctive characteristics reflecting indigenous political traditions. Royal family members received substantial territories, with the closest relatives generally receiving the largest and most strategically important holdings. Loyal followers who had supported the Zhou conquest gained smaller domains proportional to their contributions. Even certain accommodating members of the former Shang elite received confirmations of territorial control in exchange for acknowledging Zhou's supremacy. This enfeoffment process created a network of subordinate lords owing allegiance to the Zhou king. These regional rulers received territories with corresponding military obligations to the sovereign, creating a hierarchical system of political relationships reinforced through ritual observances, marriage alliances, and periodic court attendance. The system intended to resolve the fundamental challenge facing the Zhou conquerors: how to control a vast territory with limited administrative resources. By delegating local governance to trusted subordinates bound by kinship and loyalty, the early Zhou monarchs extended their effective control far beyond the direct reach of their military forces. The Zhou conquest was rapidly followed by crisis when King Wu died unexpectedly around 1043 BC, leaving a young son as heir. The succession crisis threatened to unravel the newly established political order before it could consolidate. The Duke of Zhou, younger brother of the deceased monarch, assumed regency to preserve the throne for his nephew King Qing. This decision provoked rebellion from other royal brothers who had established territorial bases through the enfeoffment system. These discontented princes allied with remnants of Shang resistance in eastern territories, creating a formidable coalition against central authority. The Duke of Zhou responded decisively, marshalling loyal forces to suppress this rebellion in a 3-year military campaign. His success preserved the nascent dynastic order while establishing crucial precedents for royal authority. During his regency, lasting approximately 7 years, the Duke established many institutional foundations of Zhou governance that would endure for centuries thereafter. He articulated key political principles through pronouncements preserved in texts like the Book of Documents, establishing ideological frameworks for understanding legitimate authority. Most remarkably, upon King Qing reaching maturity, the Duke voluntarily relinquished power to the legitimate heir, an act of political restraint that established him as an exemplary figure in subsequent political tradition. Administration under early Western Zhou operated through a system later scholars termed Fengjian, a network of fiefs ruled by relatives and allies acknowledging the ritual supremacy of the royal house. This system created concentric zones of decreasing royal control radiating outward from the capital region. The royal domain, centered initially in the Wei River Valley with its capital at Haojing near modern Xi'an, remained under direct monarchical administration. Surrounding territories fell under the control of close relatives and trusted allies who governed with considerable autonomy while maintaining ritual, military, and economic obligations to the sovereign. These territorial lords, known as Zuhou, established subordinate courts mirroring royal structures on smaller scales. They conducted local administration, maintained military forces that could be summoned for royal campaigns, collected taxes from agricultural populations, and performed rituals acknowledging superior Zhou authority. Periodic visits to the royal court, participation in royal hunting expeditions, and contributions to royal construction projects reinforced personal bonds between sovereign and subordinate rulers. This system relied more on personal relationships than bureaucratic structures, creating flexible governance capable of accommodating regional diversity while maintaining overall political coherence. Archaeological evidence reveals gradual development of administrative complexity within both royal domains and major regional states. bronze inscriptions recording official appointments, land grants, and judicial decisions demonstrate increasingly specialized governance functions. Early Western Zhou administrative positions remain primarily distributed by birth status, with aristocratic lineages monopolizing high offices. Yet even within this hereditary framework, specialized roles emerge for ritual performance, military command, agricultural management, and judicial proceedings. These specialized functions created the foundation for bureaucratic systems that would develop more fully in subsequent eras. Ritual played a crucial role in maintaining this decentralized political order. Elaborate ceremonies involving bronze vessels, precisely choreographed movements, and musical performances reinforce social hierarchies and political relationships through physical embodiment of cosmic principles. The sovereign's ritual role as intermediary with heaven took precedence over direct administrative functions, establishing a pattern wherein symbolic authority often exceeded practical power. State ceremonies marking seasonal transitions, military campaigns, ancestral commemorations, and interstate relationships created shared cultural frameworks transcending local diversity. Specially cast bronze vessels commemorating significant events held particular importance in this ritual system. These objects, requiring substantial resource investment and specialized craftsmanship, recorded royal gifts, military victories, land grants, and administrative appointments. The inscriptions on these vessels, sometimes extending to hundreds of characters, provide invaluable documentation of early Zhou political history. Beyond their textual content, the vessels themselves functioned as physical manifestations of political legitimacy, with specific forms, decorative motifs, and inscription formats restricted to appropriate status levels within the aristocratic hierarchy. The Western Zhou political system maintained remarkable stability for approximately 2 centuries following its establishment. Several factors contributed to this success. First, the ideological framework of the Mandate of Heaven provided compelling justification for Zhou rule that transcended mere military dominance. Second, kinship bonds between the royal house and regional lords created personal loyalties, reinforcing political obligations. Third, shared ritual practices generated cultural coherence across diverse territories. Fourth, the decentralized structure accommodated local conditions while maintaining overall integration through regular interaction between center and periphery. Agricultural production expanded significantly during the early Western Zhou. The introduction of improved iron tools, though still relatively rare compared to bronze implements, increased farming efficiency by allowing deeper plowing and more effective land clearance. Systematic irrigation projects extended cultivated areas into previously marginal regions. New crop varieties adapted to different soil conditions and climate zones spread through migration and trade. Population growth followed these agricultural advancements, with settlements proliferating throughout the Yellow River basin and extending gradually into previously sparsely inhabited territories. These agricultural developments fueled social transformation. Growing populations required more sophisticated administrative systems to manage land allocation, water rights, and tax collection. Increasing agricultural surplus supported larger non-agricultural populations engaged in specialized craft production, administrative functions, and military service. The expansion of cultivated land created new wealth that altered traditional status relationships, allowing some previously marginal groups to acquire economic resources, challenging old aristocratic privileges. These demographic and economic changes gradually strained the traditional governance systems established in early Zhou times. Social stratification became more pronounced and formalized during the Western Zhou period. An elaborate aristocratic hierarchy developed with precise rankings determining everything from permissible bronze vessel types to marriage possibilities, residential architecture to funeral practices. The apex of this system, theoretically at least, positioned the Zhou king as the son of heaven, with unique ritual responsibilities and privileges. Below the sovereign ranked the various levels of territorial lords whose status depended on relationships to the royal house and historical seniority. These aristocrats maintained hereditary privileges based on lineage connections, reinforced through elaborate genealogical records and ancestral rituals. Beneath the territorial aristocracy, a class of Shur emerged, men with military skills who served as retainers in aristocratic households, initially drawn from lower branches of noble lineages. This group gradually incorporated talented individuals from non-aristocratic backgrounds, creating limited social mobility within an otherwise rigid hierarchy. The Shur performed military service, managed estate production, conducted diplomatic missions, and eventually staffed administrative positions within developing state structures. Their intermediate position between aristocracy and commoners would prove crucial in subsequent social evolution. As this group eventually transformed into the scholar-official class that dominated later imperial administration, the majority of the population consisted of agricultural producers with varying degrees of freedom and obligation. Some maintained hereditary land rights with tax obligations to local lords. Others worked as tenants on aristocratic estates with more direct subordination to elite landholders. At the lowest level, enslaved captives from military campaigns provided labor for elite households and public works projects. This social stratification, though showing regional variations, established patterns that would persist with modifications throughout subsequent historical development. The intellectual foundations established during the Western Zhou would prove remarkably enduring. Early Zhou texts articulated concepts that became fundamental to subsequent political and philosophical thought. The Book of Documents preserved pronouncements on proper governance attributed to founding figures like the Duke of Zhou. The Book of Poetry collected court odes, folk songs, and ritual hymns reflecting diverse aspects of early Zhou society. The Book of Changes outlined a sophisticated system of divination that would evolve into philosophical frameworks for understanding cosmic patterns. The Book of Rites detailed ceremony and proper conduct that structured social interactions. These texts, though modified through subsequent transmission, preserved core concepts that would shape intellectual development for millennia thereafter. The concept of ritual propriety, as a mechanism for social harmony became a cornerstone of political philosophy. Unlike mere law, governing through punishment, ritual propriety operated by internalizing proper behavior through education and example. This emphasis on moral cultivation rather than external coercion established patterns for subsequent philosophical approaches to governance. The meticulous record-keeping practices established during Western Zhou created precedents for historical documentation that continued throughout imperial history. The fusion of political authority with cosmic principles laid foundations for correlative thinking that would characterize traditional intellectual frameworks across diverse disciplines. As the Western Zhou progressed, gradual changes eroded the foundations of the original political structure. The territorial lords, initially close relatives of the royal house, became increasingly remote in kinship with each passing generation. By the 9th century BC, most regional rulers shared only distant ancestors with the Zhou king, weakening personal bonds once reinforcing political loyalty. Local populations increasingly identified with regional states rather than the distant Zhou court, developing distinct cultural practices and political identities. Resource constraints limited royal capacity to maintain military superiority over increasingly wealthy vassals who developed independent armed forces capable of pursuing autonomous policies. External pressures accelerated this decline. Non-Zhou peoples along the northern and western frontiers, particularly nomadic groups taking advantage of climatic shifts favoring pastoral economies, launched increasingly effective raids against agricultural settlements. The royal house proved unable to coordinate effective defense against these incursions, forcing regional lords to develop independent military capabilities for territorial protection. These locally controlled forces further diminished royal authority as regional states relied less on central protection and developed autonomous strategic interests. sometimes conflicting with royal policies. Economic changes undermined traditional status relationships. The expansion of agricultural production through land reclamation and technological improvement created wealth outside established aristocratic control. Trade networks extended beyond traditional boundaries, creating economic interests transcending political divisions. Iron technology, becoming more widespread after approximately 800 BC, democratized access to effective tools and weapons previously restricted through bronze's higher production costs and specialized manufacturing requirements. These economic developments gradually undermined the material foundations of the original geopolitical order based on centralized control of prestige goods and restricted access to military technology. The culminating crisis arrived in 771 BC when nomadic Quan peoples allied with discontented vassals to attack the royal capital at Haojing. King Yu, reportedly distracted by his infatuation with a concubine named Baozi, had alienated many supporters through capricious governance and violation of succession practices. According to traditional accounts, the monarch lit beacon fires normally reserved for military emergencies merely to amuse his favorite consort, causing loyal forces to mobilize unnecessarily and undermining trust in royal communications. When a genuine military threat materialized, the warning system failed as vassals ignored what they assumed were false alarms. The attackers sacked the royal capital, killed King Yu, and forced the court to flee eastward to the secondary capital at Luoyang. This event traditionally marks the division between the Western Zhou and Eastern Zhou periods, representing a fundamental transformation in political reality. Though a new king, Ping, received recognition from remaining loyal vassals, effective power had irreversibly shifted from the royal court to territorial states. The Zhou monarchy would continue for another 5 centuries, but never regain effective authority beyond its immediately controlled territories. Instead, a new political era emerged, characterized by competition among regional states, only nominally acknowledging Zhou ritual supremacy. The eastern relocation fundamentally altered the Zhou political position. The court abandoned the western territories to autonomous local powers and non-Zhou peoples, losing substantial agricultural resources and population. The new capital at Luoyang, while strategically located in the Central Plains, lacked the defensive advantages of the western capital surrounded by mountains. The royal domain shrank dramatically, reducing direct resource access and military recruitment capabilities. Most significantly, the defeat shattered the aura of heaven-protected invulnerability surrounding Zhou kingship, undermining the ideological foundations of royal authority. This fragmentation, though representing a failure of central authority, catalyzed remarkable cultural and intellectual creativity in subsequent centuries. Freed from rigid orthodoxy imposed by a powerful center, regional states experimented with diverse administrative systems, military technologies, economic policies, and cultural practices. Competition drove innovation as states sought advantages against rivals through institutional reform rather than mere military strength. Political instability stimulated philosophical inquiry as thinkers sought new foundations for social order amid collapsing traditional structures. The cultural unity established during Western Zhou persisted despite political division, creating a shared civilizational framework within which multiple political entities operated, competed, and evolved. The legacy of Western Zhou proved enormously influential despite its eventual collapse. The ritual systems codified during this period established patterns for proper social relationships that would influence cultural norms for millennia. Administrative practices developed within the royal court and major regional states created precedents for subsequent governance structures. The Fengjian system, though transformed beyond recognition, persisted as a conceptual framework for understanding proper relationships between central authority and local governance. Most significantly, the mandate of heaven doctrine provided an enduring theoretical basis for legitimate rule that would inform state ideology throughout imperial history. This paradoxical combination, political failure alongside enduring cultural influence, characterizes the Western Zhou legacy. The inability to maintain effective central authority beyond a few centuries revealed structural weaknesses in the original political arrangement. Yet the cultural patterns, philosophical concepts, and social norms established during this formative period demonstrated remarkable resilience, persisting through subsequent political transformations with modifications but fundamental continuity. This tension between political fragility and cultural durability would characterize much of subsequent historical development, as dynasties rose and fell while cultural patterns demonstrated remarkable persistence across political discontinuities. The relocation of the Zhou court to Luoyang in 770 BC marked the beginning of an era characterized by declining central authority and rising competition among regional powers. Though the royal house continued to exist, bestowing titles and performing sacred rituals, actual political control devolved entirely to territorial lords who acknowledged the sovereign in name while acting with increasing autonomy. This fragmentation paradoxically unleashed extraordinary cultural and intellectual creativity as rival states competed for advantage through administrative innovation, military reform, and philosophical exploration. Historians traditionally divide this lengthy epoch into two periods: the Spring and Autumn Era, named after the Spring and Autumn Annals Chronicle, and the subsequent Warring States period. These eras witnessed the gradual transformation from a nominally unified realm governed through feudal relationships into a multi-state system characterized by ruthless competition, diplomatic maneuvering, and eventually total warfare culminating in imperial reunification. During the Spring and Autumn Era, approximately 148 small states existed within the former Zhou territory. These polities varied dramatically in size and power, from tiny city-states to substantial regional powers controlling multiple cities and extensive agricultural land. Power concentrated gradually as larger states absorbed smaller neighbors. By mid-period, a dozen or so major contenders dominated the political landscape, among them Lu, Jin, Qi, Chu, Qin, Song, and Yan. These regional powers maintained complex relationships with one another, and with the increasingly marginalized Zhou royal house. The political reality of this period necessitated new mechanisms for maintaining stability. With royal authority diminished, powerful territorial lords emerged as hegemons, *BA*, who enforced a semblance of order without claiming the mandate of heaven directly. The first recognized hegemon, Duke Huan of Qi, worked with his advisor, Guanzhong, to reform internal administration while asserting leadership among states through military strength and diplomatic skill. He convened interstate conferences, led coalitions against non-Zhou, barbarian, peoples encroaching from the periphery, and intervened in smaller states to resolve succession disputes or suppress disorder. The Zhou sovereign remained sacred in theory, but powerless in practice. A revealing incident occurred in 707 BC when King Huan of Zhou attempted to exercise actual authority by leading a military campaign against a rebellious state. The effort failed disastrously, further demonstrating royal impotence. Subsequent kings largely abandoned such pretensions, focusing instead on ritual functions and attempting to survive by playing larger states against one another through diplomacy and symbolic legitimation. Administrative complexity grew steadily as states expanded territory and population. The old aristocratic governance system based primarily on personal relationships and hereditary privilege proved increasingly inadequate for managing larger political entities. Innovative ministers introduced reforms to enhance central control, increase agricultural production, and mobilize military resources more effectively. In the state of Qi, Guanzhong implemented population registration, standardized weights and measures, monopolized salt and iron production, and reorganized military units. These administrative innovations provided templates later adopted by competing states. Military affairs underwent significant transformation. The aristocratic chariot warfare of earlier periods, when noble warriors engaged in ritualized combat governed by chivalric codes, gradually gave way to mass infantry armies. Economic changes enabled states to field larger forces as agricultural surpluses supported professional soldiers. Military commands, once reserved exclusively for aristocrats, became available to men of talent regardless of birth. The state of Jin pioneered military reforms under Shang, creating armies organized by land-based conscription rather than aristocratic levies. Interstate relations developed increasing sophistication during this period. Diplomatic envoys traveled regularly between courts, negotiating alliances, trade agreements, and marriage alliances. Summits between rulers became common, governed by elaborate protocols reflecting relative status and power. A complex system of interstate law emerged, establishing rules for diplomatic immunity, treaty obligations, and legitimate causes for warfare. These arrangements, though frequently violated, represented attempts to manage conflict within a framework of shared cultural understandings. Technological progress accelerated throughout the Eastern Zhou. Iron metallurgy spread widely after 600 BC, enabling improved agricultural tools, more effective weapons, and expanded construction capabilities. Crossbow technology emerged around the 7th century BC, gradually transforming battlefield tactics by allowing lightly trained infantry to threaten heavily armored aristocratic warriors. Sophisticated irrigation works expanded agricultural production. Urban centers grew in size and complexity, with some regional capitals reaching populations of 50,000 or more, protected by massive rammed earth fortifications extending for miles. Social mobility increased as traditional aristocratic privileges eroded. The Shur class, originally lower aristocrats serving as retainers in noble households, gradually transformed into a broader group encompassing military officers, administrative experts, and intellectuals. Merit increasingly competed with birth as a path to advancement, though aristocratic lineages retained significant advantages. In advanced states like Jin, Qi, and Chu, talented commoners could rise to ministerial rank based on administrative competence or military skill. Economic development transformed society from its foundations. Agricultural production intensified through iron tools, improved irrigation, and more efficient farming techniques. Specialized craft production expanded beyond luxury goods for aristocratic consumption to include utilitarian items for broader markets. Regional trade networks developed, initially based on prestige goods like jade, bronze vessels, and fine textiles, but gradually encompassing bulk commodities like grain, timber, and metal ores. Nascent monetary systems emerged, with cowrie shells, metal spades, and knife-shaped currencies facilitating commercial exchange. The intellectual ferment of this era produced what later generations would call the 100 schools of thought, an unprecedented flowering of philosophical exploration, addressing fundamental questions of ethics, politics, and metaphysics. This intellectual revolution emerged directly from the socio-political conditions of the time. With traditional certainties undermined by political fragmentation and rapid social change, thinkers sought new foundations for moral and political order in an increasingly unstable world. Confucius, 551 to 479 BC, emerged as the most influential figure in this intellectual landscape. Born to a declining aristocratic family in the state of Lu, he sought to restore social harmony through a revival and reinterpretation of ancient ritual practices. Failing to secure a lasting official position, he traveled between states offering counsel to rulers while gathering disciples who recorded and transmitted his teachings. His emphasis on moral cultivation, proper social relationships, and government through virtue rather than coercion established a framework for political thought that would influence subsequent millennia. Competing philosophical visions proliferated. Mozi advocated universal love transcending family and state boundaries, criticized expensive rituals as wasteful, and promoted meritocratic governance. Taoist thinkers like Laozi questioned the very premise of activist government, advocating instead a return to simplicity and natural processes unhindered by human intervention. Legalist theorists such as Shang promoted strengthening state power through strict laws, agricultural development, and military preparedness without regard for traditional morality or ritual. The frequency and scale of warfare increased dramatically by the late spring and autumn period. The Battle of Bai in 597 BC between Jin and Chu involved armies numbering in the tens of thousands, far larger than the modest forces of earlier eras. Victory increasingly depended on resource mobilization, logistical capabilities, and strategic planning rather than individual heroism or ritualized combat between aristocratic warriors. Fortifications grew more sophisticated as siege warfare became common. Extended campaigns lasting months or years replaced the brief seasonal expeditions of former times. The partition of Jin in 453 BC marked a pivotal transition from the spring and autumn to the warring states periods. Three powerful ministerial families, the Han, Zhao, and Wei, divided Jin territory among themselves, eliminating the ruling lineage and establishing independent states. This event fundamentally altered the interstate system, replacing the traditional model of rule by hereditary houses descended from the Zhou with a more nakedly competitive power structure where victory required comprehensive state transformation. The Warring States period witnessed unprecedented military, administrative, and social changes as competing powers implemented increasingly radical reforms to survive in a ruthlessly competitive environment. Warfare transitioned from limited engagements with modest aims to total conflicts seeking complete destruction of opposing states. Professional armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands marched under centralized command structures, armed with standardized weapons produced in state arsenals. Iron weapons replaced bronze entirely. Cavalry units supplemented infantry and chariots. Crossbows became standard equipment, capable of penetrating armor at considerable distances. Administrative reform reached revolutionary dimensions. The state of Qin, under the guidance of Shang and subsequent legalist ministers, implemented the most comprehensive transformation. Aristocratic privilege fell before meritocratic appointment based on tangible achievement, particularly military success. The population underwent registration, taxation, and conscription. Land underwent privatization, allowing purchase, sale, and consolidation of holdings contrary to earlier models of communal tenure. Legal codes imposed harsh punishments for violations while offering significant rewards for agricultural production and military service. Other states implemented their own reforms, often borrowing Qin innovations while adapting them to local conditions. Wei reorganized its territory into counties administered by appointed officials rather than hereditary nobles. Chu expanded aggressively southward, incorporating diverse peoples into its administrative structure. She developed sophisticated commercial policies to generate revenue from thriving trade networks. The formerly peripheral state of Yan in the northeast built extensive defensive works against nomadic peoples while developing its own centralized governance. Diplomatic maneuvering reached extraordinary sophistication during this period. The concept of vertical and horizontal alliances, Hazong and Lianheng, dominated interstate relations. Horizontal alliances sought to unite multiple states against a common threat, particularly Qin as it grew increasingly powerful. Vertical alliances represented bilateral arrangements between Qin and individual states, frequently negotiated by wandering diplomats or strategists who offered their services to various courts. Famous persuaders like Su Qin and Zhang Yi traveled between capitals, crafting complex diplomatic combinations that dissolved and reformed with bewildering rapidity. Cultural developments continued despite, or perhaps because of, incessant warfare. Each regional state developed distinctive traditions while participating in broader cultural conversations. Chu patronized shamanic traditions and produced distinctive artistic styles emphasizing flowing lines and fantastic creatures. She became known for its maritime commerce and pragmatic scholarship. Jin's successor states absorbed elements of steppe culture through interaction with northern peoples. These regional variations enriched the overall cultural landscape while maintaining fundamental coherence through shared literary, philosophical, and political concepts. Urban life flourished as capitals expanded to unprecedented size. Linzi, capital of Qi, reportedly housed over 200,000 residents within its massive walls. Planning grew more sophisticated with grid street patterns, specialized commercial districts, and monumental architecture. Markets operated under increasingly standardized regulatory systems. Urban populations diversified to include merchants, artisans, officials, military officers, and educational specialists alongside traditional aristocratic lineages. Luxury consumption among elites stimulated production of fine textiles, lacquer, jade carvings, and other prestige goods. Military technology continued its rapid evolution. Multiple states developed specialized units: Chu for its powerful infantry, Wei for its disciplined chariot forces, Qin for its ruthlessly effective crossbowmen, and Zhao for its adoption of nomadic cavalry tactics learned from steppe peoples. Fortifications grew increasingly sophisticated with multiple walls, moats, watchtowers, and defensive earthworks stretching for miles. Logistics improved dramatically as states constructed road networks, grain storage facilities, and supplied depots capable of supporting massive armies on extended campaigns. The endgame of the warring states began around 300 BC as Qin emerged definitively as the most powerful contender. Its systematic advantages: productive agriculture in the protected Wei River Valley, an effective administrative system purged of aristocratic privilege, a ruthlessly meritocratic military, and a strategic position protected by mountains, enabled increasingly aggressive expansionism. Under King Jing, who would later proclaim himself first emperor, Qin methodically eliminated rival powers through combined diplomatic isolation and overwhelming military force. The final conquest unfolded with remarkable speed. Han fell in 230 BC, followed by Zhao. Then Wei. The once powerful Chu mounted significant resistance but ultimately succumbed in 223 BC after protracted campaigns. Yan and Qi, the last remaining independent states, fell in 222 and 221 BC respectively. Within a single decade, a multi-state system that had existed for 5 centuries vanished completely, replaced by a unified imperial structure that would, despite periodic collapses and reconfigurations, provide the fundamental political model for the next 2,000 years. This extraordinary transformation from fragmented competitive states to unified empire did not represent merely military conquest. It reflected the culmination of long-developing processes. The erosion of aristocratic privilege before centralized authority, the systematization of administrative practice, the standardization of legal codes, the professionalization of military organization, and the development of ideologies justifying absolutist rule. These developments, emerging from interstate competition during the Eastern Zhou, provided the foundation for the imperial system that would endure in various forms until the early 20th century. The Eastern Zhou thus represents both an endpoint and a beginning, the final dissolution of the decentralized aristocratic order established by Western Zhou, and the incubator of centralized imperial governance that would characterize subsequent millennia. Its legacy proved ambiguous in historical consciousness. Confucian tradition looked back to this period with ambivalence, lamenting the disorder and warfare while celebrating the intellectual and cultural flowering it produced. Political theorists studied Eastern Zhou history for lessons in statecraft, diplomatic strategy, and military organization. The tension between cultural unity and political fragmentation established during this period would resurface repeatedly throughout later history as a fundamental pattern in political development. Within the chaotic landscape of competing states that characterized the final century of Eastern Zhou, one power gradually emerged as dominant through methodical reform and military excellence. The northwestern state of Qin, once dismissed as semi-barbaric by its more culturally sophisticated rivals, systematically transformed itself into an unstoppable military machine that would ultimately conquer all opposition and establish the first true imperial system. This remarkable ascent from peripheral obscurity to total dominance unfolded through deliberate policy choices, geographic advantages, and visionary leadership, culminating in the establishment of an empire that, though short-lived, would establish governmental patterns enduring for 2 millennia. Qin's rise to supremacy began long before its final conquests. Situated in the fertile Wei River Valley, protected by mountains on 3 sides, Qin territory offered natural defensive advantages while supporting productive agriculture. This geographic position provided security from attack while allowing carefully chosen offensive operations against less protected neighbors. From these secure foundations, Qin rulers methodically built military power through internal reforms that dramatically increased state capacity far beyond traditional limits. The transformation accelerated dramatically during the mid-4th century BC when Duke Shao appointed Shang as chief minister. This visionary reformer implemented sweeping changes that revolutionized Qin's society and governance. Drawing from legalist philosophical principles that prioritize state power over traditional morality or aristocratic privilege, Shang created a state focused singularly on agricultural production and military effectiveness. His reforms attacked traditional social structures while building new institutions directly serving state interests. Land previously held communally underwent redistribution to individual households responsible for tax payments and military service. This privatization increased agricultural productivity while allowing more effective population registration and control. The traditional aristocracy saw their hereditary privileges abolished, replaced by a meritocratic system where advancement depended on agricultural success or military achievement rather than birth status. New administrative divisions replaced old kinship-based governance, with households organized into mutual responsibility groups answerable for each member's behavior. Standardized law codes imposed harsh punishments for violations while offering significant rewards for compliance with state priorities. These revolutionary changes met fierce resistance from traditional elites, but Duke Shao provided consistent support, allowing full implementation. The results proved devastating for Qin's rivals. Agricultural production increased dramatically, providing surplus resources for military campaigns. Population growth accelerated as incentives for large families aligned with state interests in expanding the tax and military recruitment base. Social mobility based on merit rather than birth created opportunities for talented individuals regardless of origin, dramatically expanding the available talent pool for civil and military leadership. Most significantly, these reforms created unprecedented state capacity to mobilize resources for warfare. The mutual responsibility system facilitated military conscription by making family groups accountable for producing required soldiers. The reward system incentivized military achievement through land grants, tax exemptions, and status advancement based on battlefield success measured in enemy casualties. Standardized military units replaced aristocratic levies, creating more effective forces through consistent training and equipment. Combined, these changes produced armies of unprecedented size and effectiveness, deployed by a state single-mindedly focused on territorial expansion. The decades following Shang's reforms witnessed steady Qin expansion at its rival's expense. Despite Shang's eventual downfall and execution after Duke Gao's death, his institutional innovations remained largely intact, continuing to provide superior state capacity. Under King Zhaoxiang, Qin forces annexed substantial territories from neighboring Wei and Han. Subsequent campaigns against Zhao gained control of the Ordos region, providing additional resources and strategic depth. By the mid-3rd century BC, Qin had clearly established itself as the most powerful contender for eventual domination. Military innovation complemented these institutional advantages. Qin armies pioneered effective combined arms tactics, integrating infantry, cavalry, and crossbowmen in coordinated operations. Standardized weapons and equipment manufactured in state arsenals provided technological consistency lacking in rival forces. Professional commanders selected through demonstrated ability rather than birth led these forces with strategic sophistication beyond their opponents' capabilities. Logistics systems supported extended campaigns far from home territory, allowing sustained offensive operations rather than mere raiding expeditions. The final drive for unification accelerated dramatically after the young ruler Yingxing assumed direct control in 238 BC upon reaching adulthood, later known as Qin Shi Huang. This extraordinarily ambitious monarch combined ruthless determination with strategic patience in pursuing the ultimate goal of total conquest. Working with capable ministers, including Li Si, and military commanders like Wang Jian, he implemented a comprehensive strategy targeting each rival state in sequence, rather than attempting simultaneous campaigns that would risk hostile alliances. Diplomatic isolation preceded military attack. In this methodical approach, Qin agents employed bribery, misinformation, and exploitation of internal divisions to prevent effective coalitions from forming against them. The famous strategist Fan Sui advised, distant states should be won by accommodation, neighboring states by force. Following this principle, Qin diplomacy maintained peaceful relations with non-adjacent powers while concentrating military force against immediate neighbors, preventing coordinated resistance that might have balanced Qin's advantages. The final conquest unfolded with remarkable speed once fully launched. Han fell first early in 230 BC. Its territory integrated directly into the Qin administrative system. Zhao followed 3 years later despite fierce resistance. Wei, already severely weakened by previous defeats, succumbed with minimal fighting 1 year later. Chu, the most powerful remaining opponent, mounted substantial resistance under King Fu but ultimately collapsed after devastating campaigns led by Wang Jian in 223 BC. The northeastern states of Yan and Qi, isolated from potential allies, fell in rapid succession over the following 2 years. By 221 BC, Yingxing had accomplished what countless warriors and statesmen had attempted for centuries: complete unification of all major states under a single authority. The political implications of this unprecedented achievement demanded new conceptual frameworks. Previous Zhou kings had claimed nominal overlordship, while actually presiding over a multi-state system. Yingxing's conquest created something entirely different: direct administrative control over an immense territory without independent political entities within its borders. This revolutionary development required new terminology to express its nature. Rejecting the traditional royal title Wang, he proclaimed himself Shi Huangdi, First August Emperor, claiming universal sovereignty unprecedented in previous political experience. This title deliberately echoed ancient references to legendary sage rulers while simultaneously asserting superiority over them. The term Huang evoked the mythical 3 Augusts who established human civilization, while Di recalled the 5 emperors who supposedly ruled during the Golden Age. By styling himself First Emperor, he positioned his achievement as inaugurating an entirely new historical epoch, superseding all previous arrangements. This ideological statement announced that the age of competing states had ended permanently, replaced by a universal empire intended to endure for 10,000 generations. Having achieved military unification, the first emperor and his chief minister Li Si embarked on an ambitious program of standardization intended to transform the conquered territories from a collection of distinct states into a single integrated entity. This systematic effort targeted fundamental aspects of daily life, administration, and cultural expression. Their revolutionary program aimed to erase the separate identities that had developed during centuries of political division, replacing them with uniform practices directly serving imperial authority. The standardization of writing ranks among the most consequential of these reforms. Prior to unification, different states used variant scripts that, while sharing common origins, had evolved significant regional differences. The first emperor decreed the adoption of the small seal script throughout all imperial territories, eliminating regional variations. Officials received orders to produce standardized character lists, establishing uniform writing methods. This linguistic unification facilitated administrative communication while symbolically asserting cultural homogeneity under imperial rule. Similarly, Systematic standardization extended to practical matters of daily commerce. Varying weights and measures previously used in different regions underwent replacement by single imperial standards. Officials distributed metal weight models to markets throughout the empire as reference examples. Standard measuring containers for grain and other commodities replaced local variants. Most famously, the empire standardized axle widths for all carts and wagons, creating a transportation system where vehicles could utilize the same roads and wheel ruts throughout imperial territories. These practical measures facilitated trade while symbolizing imperial unification through everyday experience. The most revolutionary transformation involved abolishing the hereditary aristocracy that had dominated political life for centuries. The traditional feudal structure, already weakened in most states during the Warring States period, underwent complete dismantlement under Qin. Aristocratic domains were abolished entirely, replaced by a new administrative system of commanderies and counties, governed by appointed officials selected for competence rather than birth. These administrators served limited terms and could be reassigned or removed at imperial pleasure, preventing the development of independent local power bases, challenging central authority. This new administrative structure represented revolutionary centralization. The empire divided into 36 commanderies, further subdivided into counties. Each level featured parallel civil and military officials, preventing concentration of local authority. Regular rotation of officials between postings inhibited development of personal loyalty networks threatening imperial control. Standardized procedures governed all aspects of administration, with detailed regulations and reporting requirements ensuring compliance with central directives. This bureaucratic structure, though subsequently modified, established foundational patterns for imperial governance that would endure until the 20th century. Legal standardization complemented administrative reformation. The first emperor promulgated a single comprehensive legal code superseding all regional variants. This system, drawing heavily from legalist philosophy, established harsh punishments for violations while minimizing judicial discretion. Collective responsibility mechanisms held family members and neighbors accountable for reporting crimes. The legal principle of uniformity received explicit endorsement. The same crime shall receive the same punishment regardless of rank, while allowing special consideration for agricultural producers and military personnel advancing state interests. The system otherwise treated subjects uniformly before imperial law. These transformative measures encountered significant resistance from many who had benefited under previous arrangements, or held philosophical objections to the legalist principles underlying Qin governance. The imperial response proved ruthless in eliminating opposition. The infamous burning of books and burying of scholars incident exemplified this suppression of dissent. On Lixi's recommendation, the first emperor ordered the destruction of texts promoting alternative political philosophies, particularly Confucian works advocating traditional values and limited government. Only practical texts on medicine, agriculture, divination, and forestry received exemption from destruction. Most notoriously, traditional accounts claim approximately 400 scholars suffered execution for possessing prohibited books or criticizing imperial policies. While modern scholarship questions the literal accuracy of these figures, contemporary evidence confirms systematic suppression of intellectual traditions challenging legalist orthodoxy. This intellectual standardization attempted to eliminate conceptual frameworks that might justify opposition to imperial authority, establishing ideological conformity matching administrative centralization. The massive infrastructure projects characterizing the first emperor's reign demonstrated imperial power while providing practical benefits and employment for the enormous population now under central control. The road network radiated from the capital Xianyang, with standardized width main highways connecting all major administrative centers. Imperial regulations dictated the planting of trees along these routes to provide shade for travelers. Carriages traveled on the right side according to imperial decree, establishing traffic patterns, maintaining order and efficiency. This transportation network facilitated rapid movement of troops, officials, and commercial goods throughout imperial territories. Most famously, existing defensive walls constructed by various former states underwent connection and extension into what later generations would call the Great Wall. Hundreds of thousands of laborers, including convicts, conscripts, and soldiers, worked on this massive project intended to provide strategic depth against nomadic incursions from the north, rather than a single continuous structure. As often imagined, this defensive system comprised multiple overlapping fortifications adapted to local terrain. Watchtowers, garrison points, and signal stations complemented the physical barriers, creating an integrated defensive network protecting agricultural lands from nomadic raids. The Yangtze Canal represented another monumental engineering achievement. This artificial waterway connected the Shang River, flowing south to the Yangtze, with the Li rivers flowing into the Pearl River system, creating a transportation route linking northern and southern territories. This project facilitated the movement of military forces and supplies while stimulating commerce between regions with complementary resources and products. The canal's construction demonstrated sophisticated hydrological engineering, including precise elevation calculations, lock systems, and embankment reinforcement techniques preventing erosion. Personal projects reflecting imperial grandeur accompanied these practical works. The Apang Palace complex near the capital reportedly covered an immense area with capacity to accommodate 10,000 attendees at court ceremonies, constructed to demonstrate imperial magnificence. Its audience hall alone measured hundreds of meters in length according to archaeological evidence confirming literary descriptions. Similarly, massive scale characterized the imperial mausoleum complex near Mount Li. This extraordinary project, begun immediately after the first emperor assumed direct rule, employed hundreds of thousands of workers over decades, creating an artificial mountain containing elaborate burial chambers. The famous terracotta army discovered in this funerary complex demonstrates both the technical capabilities and organizational capacity of the empire. Thousands of life-sized warrior figures, each with unique facial features and accurately rendered equipment, accompanied the imperial tomb along with terracotta horses, chariots, and weapons. This ceramic army, arranged in precise military formation, represented revolutionary practice, replacing human sacrifice with symbolic representations while demonstrating imperial power extending even into the afterlife. Despite these monumental achievements in unification, standardization, and infrastructure development, the Qin imperial system contained fatal structural weaknesses that would prevent its long-term sustainability. The regime's extraordinary demands on the population through taxation, conscription, and forced labor created widespread resentment across all social classes. Legal harshness made daily existence precarious for ordinary subjects, with minor infractions potentially resulting in mutilation punishments or assignment to lethal labor projects. Even officials lived in constant fear as administrative failure or perceived disloyalty brought swift and severe punishment regardless of past service. Economic exhaustion accelerated under these pressures. Agricultural production suffered as farmers faced simultaneously increasing tax burdens and removal from their fields for labor service or military campaigns. Commercial activity struggled under oppressive regulations and arbitrary confiscation. Essential infrastructure maintenance suffered as resources were diverted to prestige projects and military campaigns. Most significantly, the elimination of local elites removed intermediate social structures that had traditionally mediated between state demands and local populations, creating direct confrontation between imperial authority and exhausted subjects. The first emperor's personality increasingly exacerbated these structural problems as his reign progressed. Historical accounts describe growing paranoia, manifested through harsh punishment of perceived critics and obsessive security measures. Multiple assassination attempts fueled this suspicion, leading to elaborate protective protocols, including multiple identical imperial carriages traveling together to confuse potential attackers. His preoccupation with immortality reportedly intensified with age, diverting substantial resources toward alchemical research and expeditions seeking legendary elixirs of eternal life. The regime suffered decisive crisis when the first emperor died suddenly while traveling in eastern territories during the 35th year of his rule. The succession process immediately revealed the imperial system's vulnerability. Rather than announcing the death immediately, Chief Eunuch Zhao Gao and Prime Minister Li Si concealed the fact while returning to the capital. During this journey, they altered the emperor's final testament, replacing the designated heir, Fusu, with a more pliable younger son. This conspiracy succeeded initially but soon unraveled as Zhao Gao eliminated Li Si and dominated the new emperor, Hu Hai, ruling from behind the throne while imperial governance deteriorated rapidly. Popular uprising erupted less than a year after the first emperor's death when Qin Shing and Wu Guang, conscripts being marched to frontier garrison duty, faced execution for arriving late due to flooding. Recognizing their inevitable death, they instead launched a rebellion that spread rapidly across exhausted populations. Though these initial rebel leaders perished relatively quickly, their uprising catalyzed widespread revolts throughout imperial territories. Local leaders emerged across former states, many claiming restoration of previous ruling houses while gathering significant military forces from disaffected populations. Two leaders ultimately emerged dominant amid this chaotic fragmentation. Liu Bang, a peasant of humble origins who had risen to minor official status, led forces that captured the Qin heartland and capital. Xian Yu, an aristocratic military commander from Chu, controlled larger armies and initially held a superior position, allocating territories among various supporters while reserving central lands for his direct control. The uneasy alliance between these leaders collapsed rapidly into open warfare that would continue for several years after the Qin dynasty's official end in 207 BC. The brevity of Qin imperial rule, effectively 15 years of unified governance under the first emperor, followed by a brief chaotic succession before total collapse, belies its profound historical significance. Despite its failure as a sustainable regime, the Qin Revolution established fundamental patterns that subsequent dynasties would modify but not abandon. The concept of unified imperial rule replaced the multi-state system permanently in political imagination and practical governance. Administrative division into provinces and counties superseded aristocratic domains as the basic framework for territorial control. Centralized bureaucracy selected by merit rather than birth became the standard governing mechanism. Despite later compromises with hereditary privilege, the Qin collapse demonstrated that extreme legalist methods created unsustainable pressures, generating their own demise. Yet subsequent regimes maintained many legalist administrative techniques while moderating their harshest aspects and incorporating Confucian elements, addressing their deficiencies. This synthesis, pragmatic legalist administrative methods cloaked in Confucian ethical rhetoric, would characterize imperial governance for 2 millennia thereafter. The Qin thus represents both an endpoint and a beginning, the culmination of centuries-long trends towards centralization and bureaucratization, and simultaneously the foundation for subsequent imperial systems that would endure with modifications until the early 20th century. In the aftermath of Qin collapse, two formidable contenders emerged from the multitude of rebel forces to contest supremacy. Their conflict, known traditionally as the Chu-Han contention, would determine the shape of the subsequent imperial order. Xian Yu, an aristocratic commander from Chu, represented traditional military prowess and heroic leadership. Liu Bang, a commoner who had risen to minor official status before rebellion, embodied pragmatic flexibility and a common touch. Their 4-year struggle illuminated contrasting leadership approaches while establishing the foundation for a new imperial system that would endure for centuries. Xian Yu initially held a superior position through martial reputation and larger forces. After decisive victory against Qin armies, he implemented a settlement dividing the empire among 19 kings, most drawn from former ruling houses of conquered states. This arrangement effectively restored a modified version of the pre-Qin multi-state system while acknowledging his supreme authority as hegemon king of Western Zhou. He retained the central territories directly while granting peripheral kingdoms to allies and potential rivals, including assigning Han in the remote Bashu region to Liu Bang. This settlement proved unstable almost immediately as underlying tensions between centralization and fragmentation remained unresolved. Liu Bang demonstrated superior political instinct by methodically building alliances with disaffected recipients of Xian Yu's settlement, while consolidating control over his assigned territory. When open conflict erupted, he initially suffered defeats against Xian Yu's superior military prowess, but gradually eroded his opponent's position through strategic flexibility. Where Xian Yu excelled in battlefield command and personal combat, Liu Bang mastered psychological warfare, diplomatic maneuvering, and strategic patience. He willingly retreated when facing disadvantage, violated agreements when expedient, and prioritized ultimate victory over heroic gestures or short-term reputation. The contrast between these leaders extended beyond military tactics to fundamental governance philosophy. Xian Yu, despite his rebellion against Qin, represented traditional aristocratic values, emphasizing personal honor, martial virtue, and hereditary privilege. Liu Bang embodied pragmatic adaptation, willingness to employ talented individuals regardless of background, and a focus on sustainable governance rather than heroic leadership. These differing approaches manifested in their treatment of conquered territories. Xian Yu permitted his forces to loot and then destroy the Qin capital, alienating local populations. Liu Bang maintained discipline among his troops and implemented moderate policies, attracting defectors from his rival. The decisive confrontation occurred at Gaixia, where Liu Bang's forces trapped Xian Yu's army through coordinated maneuver. According to dramatic traditional accounts, Xian Yu's remaining forces found themselves surrounded while Han troops sang Chu folk songs, suggesting widespread desertion of his countrymen. Rather than surrender, Xian Yu reportedly fought through enemy lines with a handful of followers before committing suicide beside a river, declaring, "Heaven, not my ability, caused my defeat." This romantic end strengthened his historical portrayal as a tragic hero rather than a failed contender, remaining a powerful cultural archetype celebrating martial virtue despite political failure. Following this victory early in 202 BC, Liu Bang established the Han dynasty that would rule with one brief interruption for the next 4 centuries, taking the title Emperor Gao. He confronted challenges remarkably similar to those faced by the Qin founder a generation earlier: how to establish sustainable centralized governance after generations of division and warfare. His approach demonstrated pragmatic moderation informed by recent experience of Qin failure, seeking a balance between centralization necessary for imperial cohesion and flexibility required for stability and popular acceptance. The early Han imperial structure reflected this balanced approach. Gaozu retained the Qin administrative division into commanderies directly administered by central appointees in core territories. However, he simultaneously established vassal kingdoms in peripheral regions, often governed by trusted relatives or supporters with substantial autonomy under nominal imperial sovereignty. This hybrid system effectively created concentric zones of imperial control, direct administration in the heartland, decreasing central authority in outer regions, and diplomatic relationships beyond imperial boundaries while creating potential long-term challenges through divided authority. This arrangement provided immediate stability while acknowledging the practical limits of centralized control over such vast territories. Legal reform exemplified this moderate approach. While maintaining the bureaucratic framework of Qin legal codes, Gaozu dramatically reduced their severity by eliminating the harshest punishments and simplifying regulations. The famous 3-chapter law replaced the labyrinthine Qin statutes with straightforward provisions covering homicide, assault, and theft. Additional legislation followed addressing other concerns, but the overall legal burden on ordinary subjects decreased dramatically. Collective punishment largely disappeared. allowing families to live without constant fear of punishment for relatives' actions. These changes reduced bureaucratic control at local levels but generated popular support essential for dynastic stability. Economic policies similarly balanced state interests with popular welfare. Tax rates decreased significantly from Qin levels, allowing agricultural recovery after warfare and excessive exactions. Government monopolies on salt and iron initially underwent relaxation, permitting private enterprise in these lucrative sectors. State control of coinage remained, ensuring monetary stability beneficial for commerce. Land distribution received particular attention through policies promoting smallholder agriculture over large estates. The regime acknowledged tax exemptions for impoverished regions recovering from warfare, demonstrating flexibility impossible under rigid Qin administration. These measures gradually restored prosperity while maintaining sufficient revenue for imperial operations. Intellectual policy revealed the most dramatic departure from Qin precedent. Where the first emperor had attempted to eliminate competing intellectual traditions through book burning and scholar suppression, Gaozu adopted intellectual pluralism, allowing various philosophical approaches to coexist. Confucian scholars found positions within the developing bureaucracy alongside practitioners of more pragmatic traditions. The famous debate on salt and iron during a subsequent reign exemplified this pluralistic approach, with court officials openly advocating competing economic theories based on different philosophical premises. This intellectual openness allowed adaptive policy development impossible under rigid ideological orthodoxy. Perhaps most consequentially, Gaozu instituted personnel policies emphasizing practical effectiveness over theoretical purity. Unlike Qin's emphasis on absolute loyalty and ideological conformity, early Han administration valued competence across diverse backgrounds. The emperor famously appointed former opponents to high positions when they demonstrated useful capabilities. His pragmatic declaration that, "I conquered the empire from horseback, but one cannot govern from horseback," acknowledged the necessity of employing experienced administrators even when they had previously served rival regimes. This meritocratic approach maximized available talent, while demonstrating confidence that practical incentives would ensure loyalty more effectively than ideological tests or punitive measures. The resulting governmental synthesis represented neither a complete restoration of pre-Qin traditions nor a continuation of Qin innovations, but rather creative adaptation drawing elements from both while adding novel features. From Qin came administrative centralization, standardized procedures, and bureaucratic structure. Pre-Qin traditions contributed ethical governance concepts, intellectual diversity, and recognition of practical limits on central authority. The Han innovation involved balancing these competing elements through flexible application rather than rigid adherence to any single model. This pragmatic approach, avoiding extremes while incorporating useful elements from diverse traditions, established patterns characterizing subsequent imperial governance for 2 millennia. Despite Gaozu's success establishing stable governance after decades of warfare, the early Han faced persistent challenges requiring constant attention. The Xiongnu nomadic confederations along the northern frontier posed the most immediate external threat. These steppe peoples controlled vast territories beyond the Great Wall, conducting periodic raids against agricultural settlements and disrupting trade routes. Their mobile lifestyle and superior cavalry made them nearly impossible to defeat decisively through conventional military campaigns. Unlike settled states with fixed capitals and infrastructure vulnerable to capture, the Xiongnu could simply withdraw into the steppe when confronted with superior forces, then return after imperial armies withdrew. Gaozu personally led early campaigns against these northern peoples with disappointing results. During one expedition, his forces suffered encirclement at Pingqing, narrowly avoiding complete destruction when unexpected fog provided cover for retreat. This humiliating experience demonstrated the limitations of traditional Chinese military approaches against nomadic opponents and necessitated the development of alternative strategies. The resulting He policy established tributary relationships with Xiongnu leadership through diplomatic marriages, trade agreements, and regular gift exchanges, while appearing as submission to contemporary Chinese observers. This pragmatic approach minimized border conflicts while allowing internal development during the dynasty's formative decades. Internal challenges proved equally pressing, particularly the tension between central authority and semi-autonomous kingdoms established during imperial foundation. These vassal states, many ruled by imperial relatives, controlled substantial territories, maintained independent military forces, collected local taxes, and operated their own administrative systems under nominal imperial sovereignty. This arrangement had provided essential stability during dynastic establishment, but increasingly threatened imperial cohesion as rulers of these kingdoms pursued independent policies and accumulated power, potentially challenging the throne itself. Several major rebellions demonstrated this danger. Just 7 years after dynastic founding, 7 kingdoms rose simultaneously against central authority in the Rebellion of the Seven States. Though ultimately suppressed, this coordinated uprising revealed structural weaknesses in the original imperial settlement. Similar rebellions occurred periodically throughout early Han, culminating in the massive rebellion of the Seven Kingdoms during Emperor Jing's reign. Each suppression resulted in territorial reorganization, reducing vassal state autonomy while expanding directly administered commanderies. This gradual centralization process unfolded across several reigns, demonstrating institutional learning and adaptation rather than rigid adherence to the founder's original arrangements. Succession issues created additional complications following Gaozu's death. His designated heir, subsequently known as Emperor Hui, proved ineffectual, while his mother, Empress Lu, exercised actual authority as regent. Following Emperor Hui's early death, she maintained control through child emperors while systematically eliminating potential rivals from Gaozu's other consorts. Her 16-year effective rule, known traditionally as the Lu clan regency, witnessed aggressive centralization efforts and attempts to establish her own family as dynastic successor. Only after her death did members of the Lu imperial clan successfully reassert control, purging Lu family members and restoring the founder's lineage. This episode established precedents for both female regency power and the dangers of consort family domination that would recur throughout imperial history. The reign of Emperor Wen marked important consolidation following these early challenges, ascending the throne after Empress Lu's death and the subsequent political purge. He implemented policies emphasizing stability, economic development, and moderate governance. His frugal administration reduced expenditure on imperial luxury while building financial reserves against future emergencies. Tax reductions stimulated agricultural recovery and commercial development. Criminal punishments underwent further moderation, with executioner swords reportedly rusting from disuse during his 23 years on the throne. The resulting prosperity and stability established foundations for subsequent expansion under his more ambitious son, Emperor Wu, whose reign lasted 54 years from 141 to 87 BC. Transformed the Han from a regional power to a dominant empire through military expansion, administrative reform, economic innovation, and cultural development. His assertive policies built upon the solid foundation established during previous reigns while dramatically extending imperial influence across Eastern Asia. The resulting political, economic, and cultural patterns would define imperial governance for centuries thereafter, earning his reign recognition as the apogee of Western Han achievement and establishing models for subsequent dynastic golden ages. Military expansion under Emperor Wu fundamentally altered the empire's relationship with surrounding peoples, abandoning the defensive Heqin policy toward the Xiongnu. He launched massive offensive campaigns deep into the steppe. Generals Wei Qing and Hui Xubing led armies numbering hundreds of thousands, supported by complex logistics systems sustaining operations far beyond settled agricultural regions. These expeditions inflicted significant defeats on Xiongnu forces, captured substantial territories, including the strategically vital Heqi corridor, and established commanderies in formerly nomadic regions. though failing to eliminate the Xiongnu threat entirely. These campaigns significantly reduced their power while demonstrating imperial military capacity, extending far beyond traditional boundaries. Territorial expansion continued in all directions under Emperor Wu's direction. Campaigns into Korea established 4 commanderies controlling its northern portions. Expeditions into southwest territories incorporated non-Chinese peoples into the imperial system. Most significantly, military operations into Central Asia secured trade routes later known as the Silk Road while establishing tributary relationships with distant states. This expansionist program effectively doubled imperial territory compared to early Han borders, incorporating diverse populations and resources while creating buffer zones protecting core agricultural regions from external threats. This military expansion required administrative innovations to govern newly incorporated territories effectively. Emperor Wu systematically implemented centralization measures, reducing aristocratic influence while strengthening bureaucratic control. The remaining vassal kingdoms underwent reduction or elimination, replaced by directly administered commanderies. Local governance increasingly fell to centrally appointed officials, rotated regularly to prevent the development of autonomous power bases. Censorate systems monitored official conduct through regular inspections and performance evaluations. These measures collectively strengthened imperial authority while reducing intermediate powers between the throne and subjects. Economic policy under Emperor Wu similarly strengthened central control while generating revenue for ambitious programs. Government monopolies on salt, iron, alcoholic beverages, and coinage generated substantial income while allowing regulation of essential commodities. Standardized coinage facilitated commerce throughout expanded territories. Agricultural colonies in frontier regions increased food production while settling military veterans in strategic locations. Taxation underwent rationalization through improved registration systems, documenting population and landholding patterns while creating significant administrative burdens. These measures dramatically increased state capacity to mobilize resources for imperial projects. Perhaps most consequentially, Emperor Wu established Confucianism as state orthodoxy through institutional innovation that would endure throughout subsequent dynastic history. The imperial university expanded dramatically, providing standardized education emphasizing classical texts for future officials. The civil service examination system, though rudimentary compared to later elaborations, initiated merit-based selection processes for administrative positions. Official sponsorship of textual compilation and commentary established canonical interpretations of classical works. These initiatives collectively elevated Confucian doctrine from one philosophical tradition among many to official state ideology informing governance practices and educational standards. Cultural developments during this period matched political expansion in significance. The historian Sima Qian compiled the monumental records of the Grand Historian, establishing paradigmatic patterns for subsequent historiography while documenting early imperial development. Literary innovation flourished with poets like Sima Shang establishing new forms extending traditional expressions. Technological advancement continued across multiple fields, including mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. The resulting cultural efflorescence established Western Han as a classical reference point for subsequent dynasties seeking to legitimate themselves through cultural achievement paralleling economic and military success. This remarkable expansion ultimately generated contradictions that would undermine the Western Han system. Military campaigns and infrastructure projects, while expanding imperial reach, imposed enormous financial burdens requiring ever-increasing taxation. Bureaucratic growth necessary for administering expanded territories created parasitic extraction competing with productive economic activities. Wealth concentration accelerated despite periodic reform efforts, generating social stratification and undermining the agrarian base supporting imperial operations. These structural tensions, initially manageable under effective leadership, would eventually contribute to dynastic decline when combined with leadership failures and external challenges. The Han system faced a severe test when Wang Mang, a consort family member serving as regent for a child emperor, seized the throne and proclaimed the Xian dynasty early in the 1st century AD. His 16-year reign represented simultaneously radical innovation and attempted restoration, justifying usurpation through portents suggesting heaven's mandate had shifted. Wang Mang implemented sweeping reforms addressing accumulated social problems of late Western Han. He nationalized land ownership, abolished private slavery, reformed currency, adjusted tax structures, and reorganized administrative divisions. These radical measures, while theoretically addressing genuine social problems, encountered fierce opposition from entrenched interests while suffering from implementation difficulties. The resulting instability, exacerbated by natural disasters including Yellow River flooding, generated widespread rebellion culminating in Wang Mang's overthrow and the restoration of Han imperial rule under the Lu family line. This restored Eastern Han would maintain the imperial system for another 2 centuries, building upon foundations established during the Western period while adapting to changed circumstances. The Wang Mang interregnum, though brief, demonstrated both the extraordinary resilience of the imperial structure established by Gaozu and its capacity for regeneration following even revolutionary disruption. This cycle, establishment, expansion, crisis, restoration, would establish patterns characterizing imperial history through numerous dynastic transitions across subsequent millennia. The restoration of Han rule following Wang Mang's usurpation demonstrated remarkable institutional resilience while initiating a new phase in imperial development. Lu Xian, a distant relative of the Western Han imperial line, emerged victorious from numerous contenders vying for power amid widespread rebellion and social disruption. Taking the reign title Guanwu upon ascending the throne, he methodically reconsolidated imperial authority through military campaigns against regional warlords, remnant Xian forces, and various rebel groups. This process, extending across a decade following his initial proclamation as emperor, re-established central governance over territories that had fragmented during the tumultuous final years of Wang Mang's rule. Unlike the Western Han founder who established an entirely new system, Guangwu undertook a systematic restoration of proven governance structures while implementing selective reforms addressing evident weaknesses. The capital relocated to Luoyang in the eastern portion of the empire, reflecting strategic recalculation after bitter experience with natural disasters and rebellions that had threatened the previous capital at Chang'an. Administrative divisions underwent reorganization with increased emphasis on directly governed commanderies rather than semi-autonomous kingdoms. The recruitment system for officials received particular attention with expanded emphasis on recommendations based on moral character and demonstrated administrative ability rather than solely milita. Why achievement or aristocratic background? This restored system required nearly 2 decades to stabilize completely. Frontier regions particularly resisted reincorporation, with non-Chinese peoples along the southern and western periphery maintaining effective independence for extended periods. Xiongmu Confederation fragments along the northern borders alternated between tributary submission and outright hostility depending on immediate circumstances and leadership. Naval expeditions re-established imperial authority over coastal regions where pirate organizations had established autonomous control. This gradual consolidation demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of imperial governance, capable of eventual restoration across vast territories, but requiring extensive time and resources to re-establish effective control after significant disruption. Once stabilized, the Eastern Han maintained the fundamental institutional framework established during the Western period while developing important modifications responding to changed circumstances. The recruitment system for imperial officials evolved significantly with growing emphasis on formal recommendation pathways identifying candidates through moral reputation and educational attainment. The imperial university expanded dramatically, eventually hosting thousands of students preparing for government service through classical education. Local academies proliferated in provincial centers, extending standardized educational access beyond the capital region. These developments strengthen meritocratic elements in the bureaucratic system while increasing Confucian influence on governance practice. Civil administration increasingly predominated over military leadership, reversing priorities from the dynasty's founding period. Professional administrators with classical education and family traditions of government service gradually displaced military commanders in senior positions. Palace eunuchs simultaneously gained influence through proximity to imperial decision-makers, creating an alternative power center competing with the regular bureaucracy. Provincial governorships, once primarily military commands, transformed into predominantly civil positions, supervising tax collection, judicial proceedings, and infrastructure maintenance. This civilianization process strengthened administrative consistency while potentially weakening responsive capacity during crisis situations requiring decisive military leadership. Economic changes created both opportunities and challenges for imperial governance. Agricultural production expanded through improved irrigation techniques, the introduction of new crop varieties, and the colonization of previously marginal lands. Population growth accelerated, with census records indicating approximately 60 million subjects by mid-dynasty, compared to roughly 20 million during early Western Han. Commercial networks extended throughout the empire and beyond, with specialized markets, standardized contractual forms, and sophisticated financial instruments facilitating long-distance trade. Manufacturing sophistication increased with production centers specializing in particular goods ranging from ceramics to textiles, metalwork to lacquer. These developments generated substantial wealth supporting imperial operations while simultaneously creating more complex systems potentially vulnerable to disruption. Land distribution patterns underwent significant transformation during this period. The early Han emphasis on smallholder agriculture supporting independent farmers gradually eroded despite periodic reform efforts. Economic pressures, population growth, and political favoritism contributed to increasing concentration of landholding among wealthy families, often connected to the imperial court. These large estates employed tenant farmers and agricultural laborers rather than independent smallholders, altering social relationships in rural areas while potentially reducing agricultural productivity through absentee management. Tax avoidance strategies implemented by powerful landowners shifted fiscal burdens onto remaining independent farmers, creating cycles of indebtedness and land abandonment that further accelerated consolidation patterns. External relations during Eastern Han demonstrated both continuity and adaptation compared to Western precedents. The northern frontier witnessed dramatic transformation when the previously unified Xiongnu Confederation fragmented into competing groups following internal leadership disputes. One faction, identified in Chinese sources as the Southern Xiongnu, accepted settlement within imperial territories under tributary status. This arrangement provided buffer protection against the remaining northern Xiongnu while introducing substantial nomadic populations into frontier regions. Similarly, pragmatic approaches characterize relations with other peripheral peoples, with tribute systems, trade agreements, and occasional military expeditions maintaining stable frontiers despite periodic conflicts. The most significant external development occurred in diplomatic and commercial connections with distant regions. The famous Zhang-Qian expeditions during Western Han had established initial contacts with Central Asian states. Eastern Han rulers expanded these connections dramatically, developing regular diplomatic exchanges and trade relationships with territories extending across Central Asia to the Parthian Empire and ultimately the eastern provinces of the Roman world. Buddhist teachings reached imperial territories through these transcontinental connections, initially establishing small communities of primarily non-Chinese adherents and trading centers while gradually extending influence among native populations. These foreign contacts introduced new crops, technologies, artistic motifs, and intellectual concepts that gradually transformed imperial culture. Despite official emphasis on traditional values, scientific and technological advancement accelerated during Eastern Han, building upon foundations established in earlier periods. astronomical observation became increasingly sophisticated with detailed records of celestial phenomena supporting calendar development and astrological interpretation relevant to imperial decision-making. Mathematical knowledge expanded beyond practical applications into theoretical exploration of numerical relationships and geometrical principles. Medical understanding advanced through systematic observation and textual compilation with competing theoretical frameworks explaining disease causation and treatment approaches. Engineering achievements included sophisticated water management systems, improved metallurgical techniques, and structural innovations permitting larger architectural spans and more efficient construction methods. Among numerous technological innovations emerging during this period, paper manufacture deserves particular attention for its revolutionary implications. Traditional historical accounts attribute its invention to Kailun during Emperor He's reign. Though archaeological evidence suggests earlier developmental stages, this technology, produced from plant fibers processed into thin sheets suitable for writing, dramatically reduced text production costs compared to previous materials like bamboo strips, wooden tablets, or silk. The resulting information revolution facilitated administrative record-keeping, educational expansion, and literary production while enabling more effective knowledge transmission across both space and time, though its full impact would unfold across subsequent centuries. Paper technology ranks among the most consequential innovations in world history for its transformative effects on information management and cultural transmission. Cultural developments during Eastern Han demonstrated creative tension between classical reverence and innovative adaptation. Scholarly attention focused increasingly on interpreting canonical texts through commentarial traditions, explaining ancient works for contemporary audiences. The resulting exegetically literature elaborated sophisticated hermeneutic approaches, balancing textual authority with practical application. Artistic production similarly balanced traditional motifs with technical innovation and occasional foreign influence. Literary forms evolved within established frameworks with historical writing, philosophical discourse, and poetic expression, all demonstrating both continuity and development. This cultural pattern, innovation within tradition rather than revolutionary rejection, characterized imperial civilization throughout subsequent history. Intellectual life during this period witnessed important developments in multiple traditions. Confucianism strengthened its institutional position through connections with imperial administration and educational systems. But internal divisions created competing interpretive schools with distinct approaches to classical texts. Taoism transformed from primarily philosophical discourse into more organized religious traditions incorporating meditation practices, dietary regimens, alchemical experimentation, and ritual observance. The introduction of Buddhism established another significant tradition that would eventually challenge both Confucian social ethics and Taoist metaphysics while offering alternative paths to spiritual development. These diverse intellectual currents coexisted within a relatively pluralistic environment that accommodated multiple approaches despite official Confucian predominance. Despite these achievements, structural weaknesses gradually undermined Eastern Han stability during its 2nd century. Factional conflict within the imperial court increasingly paralyzed effective governance, with competing groups centered around consort families, eunuch officials, and Confucian scholars engaging in destructive power struggles. Regional governors exercised growing autonomy from central direction, responding to local conditions while developing independent power bases. Economic disparities widened between wealthy landowners connected to court politics and impoverished agricultural producers bearing disproportionate tax burdens. These internal tensions created mounting dysfunction that left the system increasingly vulnerable to external shocks. The decisive crisis erupted with the Yellow Turban Rebellion during Emperor Ling's reign late in the 2nd century AD. This massive peasant uprising drew inspiration from Taoist religious teachings, promising cosmic renewal through the overthrow of corrupt authority. Led by faith healer Zhang Jiao, the movement attracted hundreds of thousands of followers organized into quasi-military units identified by yellow head coverings. though eventually suppressed through massive military mobilization. This rebellion fundamentally altered power relationships by necessitating the delegation of emergency authority to regional commanders who subsequently maintained independent forces. The resulting militarization of provincial governance created warlord dynamics that would ultimately overshadow imperial authority despite the rebellion's defeat. This emergency response accelerated institutional breakdown already underway through factional conflict. Court eunuchs controlling access to successive child emperors engaged in bloody purges of Confucian officials perceived as threats to their influence. The infamous partisan prohibitions executed or exiled thousands of scholars and officials, destroying institutional memory while creating martyr figures celebrated by subsequent generations. Provincial administrators facing local crises increasingly acted independently when central guidance proved contradictory or unrealistic. Agricultural disruption through warfare, excessive taxation, and natural disasters stimulated mass population movement, undermining census records and tax collection systems. These compounding problems overwhelmed adaptive capacity, creating systemic failure rather than merely transitional difficulty. The final dissolution unfolded through sequential usurpation of imperial prerogatives by military commanders originally empowered to address specific crises. Dongshui, a frontier general commanding substantial forces, seized the capital and installed puppet emperors under his control before eventually facing assassination for excessive brutality. His elimination created a power vacuum filled through complex maneuvering among various regional commanders controlling different territories and resources. Cao Cao emerged predominant among these contenders through superior strategic vision, administrative competence, and political manipulation, while maintaining nominal Han imperial structures with puppet emperors. He effectively established independent authority, eventually formalized when his son proclaimed the Wei dynasty following his death. The famous Battle of Red Cliffs marked a crucial turning point in this transition process. Cao Cao, having consolidated control over northern territories through military campaigns against rival warlords, attempted southern conquest with massive forces moving down the Yangtze River. An alliance between southern commanders Liu Bei and Sun Quan achieved an unlikely victory against these numerically superior forces, establishing the tripartite division that would characterize the subsequent Three Kingdoms period. This configuration, Chao Wei in the north, Shu Han in the southwest, and Eastern Zhou in the southeast, replaced Han unity with regional states claiming imperial legitimacy while engaging in persistent conflict interrupted by temporary alliances and diplomatic maneuvering. The formal end of Han came when Chao Pai, following his father's death, compelled the last Han emperor to abdicate and proclaimed himself founder of the Wei dynasty. This transition, though representing significant political discontinuity, maintained substantial institutional continuity in administrative structures, legal frameworks, and cultural patterns established during 4 centuries of Han governance. Unlike the catastrophic Zhou collapse that had created prolonged warfare before Qin unification, the Han transition, though certainly disruptive, preserved substantial governmental capacity subsequently utilized by competing successor states. This pattern, political fragmentation without complete institutional collapse, represented an important evolution in imperial cycles compared to pre-imperial precedents. Several factors contributed to Han decline despite remarkable institutional sophistication and cultural achievement. The unavoidable tension between centralized administration and local autonomy across vast territories created persistent structural challenges requiring constant attention and adaptation. Imperial families demonstrated a biological tendency toward declining competence across generations, with founder vigor gradually replaced by palace-raised successors lacking direct administrative or military experience. Economic stratification accelerated despite periodic reform efforts, undermining the agricultural base supporting imperial operations while creating parallel power structures competing with official hierarchies. External pressures from nomadic peoples required persistent resource allocation to frontier defense, diverting capabilities from internal development and governance improvement. Perhaps most significantly, the Eastern Han suffered a decline in leadership quality during crucial periods when an adaptive response might have addressed emerging problems before reaching catastrophic scale. The succession of child emperors during the latter dynasty created power vacuums filled by consort families, court eunuchs, and eventually military strongmen rather than experienced administrators capable of implementing necessary reforms. Factional conflicts consumed energy better directed towards substantive governance challenges, creating institutional paralysis precisely when flexibility and innovation were most needed. The resulting systemic failure reflected not inevitable decline but rather specific historical circumstances preventing effective adaptation to changing conditions. The Han legacy nevertheless endured far beyond its political dissolution, establishing patterns that would influence East Asian civilization for 2 millennia thereafter. The imperial governmental system, combining bureaucratic administration with monarchical authority, provided a template for all subsequent dynastic formations. Intellectual frameworks synthesizing Confucian ethics, legalist techniques, and Taoist perspectives created sophisticated governance theory adaptable to changing circumstances while maintaining fundamental continuity. Economic organizations integrating agricultural production, commercial exchange, and manufacturing specialization established patterns resilient through political disruption. Cultural achievements in literature, historiography, philosophy, science, and technology created foundations for subsequent development across multiple fields. So profound was this influence that later restoration movements consistently invoked Han precedent as a legitimizing model, with multiple subsequent dynasties explicitly styling themselves as Han restorations. The very term, Han, transformed from a dynastic designation to an ethnic and cultural identifier, eventually becoming the predominant self-designation of the Chinese people themselves. This remarkable transformation from political institution to civilizational identity demonstrates the Han achievement transcending mere governmental structures to establish enduring cultural patterns. Resilient through subsequent centuries of political reconfiguration, foreign invasion, and social transformation. The collapse of Han imperial unity ended ancient China's formative period while establishing enduring patterns that would characterize subsequent historical development for 2 millennia. Despite political fragmentation following Han dissolution, the fundamental frameworks established during these formative centuries demonstrated remarkable resilience through cycles of unity and division, native rule and foreign conquest, expansion and contraction. The imperial governmental system, intellectual traditions, economic organizations, and cultural achievements created during this period provided foundations for one of world history's most continuous civilizations, maintaining recognizable coherence despite dramatic transformations across subsequent eras. The political framework established through successive innovations from the warring states through Han represented perhaps the most significant legacy of this formative period. Unlike European experiences where Roman imperial collapse led to fundamentally different political organizations, the Chinese imperial system consistently reemerged following periods of division, with each reunification consciously invoking previous dynastic models while implementing adaptations addressing contemporary circumstances. This pattern, division followed by reunion under modified imperial structures, characterized the entire span from Han collapse to the early 20th century, demonstrating extraordinary institutional resilience across nearly 2,000 years. Several key elements of this imperial framework deserve particular attention for their enduring influence. The concept of unified sovereignty under a single ruler claiming universal authority provided the ideological foundation for political legitimacy throughout subsequent history. Even during prolonged division, competing states typically claimed imperial status rather than accepting permanent fragmentation as a legitimate arrangement. This unification imperative continuously reasserted itself, with periods of division consistently viewed as temporary anomalies rather than acceptable alternatives to imperial unity. The remarkable persistence of this unification ideal through centuries of actual division represents one of Chinese political history's most distinctive characteristics. The bureaucratic administrative system emerging during this period similarly demonstrated remarkable longevity. The Qin innovation replacing aristocratic governance with merit-based bureaucracy. Though modified by the Han to incorporate Confucian ethical dimensions, established governmental patterns that would characterize all subsequent imperial formations. Professional administrators selected through various merit-based mechanisms rather than solely hereditary privilege became standard governance practice. Though specific selection methods evolved significantly over time, this bureaucratic continuity provided institutional resilience, allowing administrative recovery following political disruption. Maintaining governmental capacity through dynastic transitions that might otherwise have produced complete systemic collapse. The dynastic cycle concept emerging from these formative experiences provided a sophisticated framework for understanding political change within overarching continuity. The Mandate of Heaven doctrine, articulated during early Zhou and elaborated by subsequent thinkers, established a pattern wherein virtuous founders established dynasties that subsequently declined through moral corruption before heaven transferred its mandate to new ruling houses demonstrating superior virtue. This framework simultaneously legitimized existing authority while providing theoretical justification for rebellion against corrupt rule, creating a remarkably stable conceptual system. Accommodating political change without destroying the fundamental legitimacy of imperial governance itself. The resulting pattern, establishment, expansion, decline, replacement, provided an interpretive framework for understanding political history throughout subsequent millennia. The balance of pragmatic legalism and ethical Confucianism characterizing mature imperial governance represented another enduring legacy. The Han synthesis incorporating legalist administrative techniques within a Confucian ethical framework created a remarkably adaptive governance model combining practical effectiveness with moral legitimacy. Subsequent dynasties consistently maintained this balance, though specific equilibrium points shifted according to contemporary circumstances and leadership preferences. This synthesis allowed imperial governance to maintain both functional effectiveness and moral authority through widely varying conditions, providing flexibility while maintaining fundamental continuity in basic governance approach across diverse historical contexts. Economic innovations during this formative period similarly established patterns demonstrating remarkable longevity. Agricultural systems balancing intensive cultivation techniques with extensive land reclamation provided a sustainable foundation for supporting large populations despite periodic disruption. Water management systems, including flood control, irrigation networks, and transportation canals, transformed natural hydrology into productive infrastructure supporting both agricultural production and commercial integration. Specialized manufacturing centers produced goods ranging from everyday necessities to sophisticated luxury items, creating complex economic networks extending throughout imperial territories and beyond. These economic patterns demonstrated remarkable resilience through political disruption, often maintaining functional operation despite governmental collapse. Technological innovations from this period produced transformative effects extending far beyond immediate contexts. Paper manufacture revolutionized information management, dramatically reducing text production costs while enabling more extensive record-keeping, educational access, and literary creation. Iron metallurgy transformed both agricultural production through improved tools and military capabilities through superior weapons, creating a technological foundation for subsequent development across multiple fields. Civil engineering achievements, including road networks, bridge construction, and urban water systems, established infrastructure patterns that would characterize imperial territories for millennia thereafter. These technological foundations, though subsequently enhanced through incremental improvement, demonstrated remarkable longevity in basic operational principles. Intellectual traditions established during this period provided conceptual frameworks that would structure thinking across diverse fields throughout subsequent history. Confucianism established ethical principles governing social relationships, political responsibilities, and educational priorities that profoundly influenced cultural development far beyond formal philosophical discourse. Taoism provided alternative perspectives emphasizing natural processes, spontaneous development, and limitations of human intervention that balanced activist Confucian approaches. Legalist thought contributed pragmatic governance techniques and systematic administration methods despite official rejection of its harsher aspects. Together with other schools emerging during the Hundred Schools period, these intellectual traditions created sophisticated conceptual resources supporting subsequent cultural development across changing historical circumstances. The historical consciousness emerging during this period represented another distinctive legacy with profound implications for subsequent development. The systematic compilation of historical records, beginning with the Confucian Spring and Autumn Annals and reaching sophisticated expression in Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, established historiographical traditions unmatched in contemporary civilizations. This historical documentation, maintained through subsequent dynasties by specialized historical offices, created unprecedented continuity in institutional memory across political transitions. The resulting historical consciousness provided both practical governance resources through precedent analysis and cultural continuity through a shared understanding of historical development across hanging circumstances. Language standardization and literary development during this period created cultural foundations extending far beyond the immediate political context. The Qin unification of writing systems, though subsequently modified through evolutionary development, established a unified communication medium across diverse linguistic regions, enabling administrative coordination and cultural transmission despite significant spoken language variation. Literary forms developed during Han times established patterns for subsequent development across genres ranging from philosophical discourse to poetic expression, historical documentation to fictional narrative. These linguistic and literary frameworks provided cultural continuity, transcending political disruption, maintaining civilizational coherence through periods of fragmentation that might otherwise have produced permanent cultural divergence. Scientific and mathematical knowledge developed during this formative period similarly established foundations for subsequent intellectual traditions. Astronomical observation systems created during Western Han reached sophisticated expression in Eastern Han mathematical astronomy, establishing observational practices and theoretical frameworks that would influence subsequent traditions for millennia. Mathematical knowledge extending beyond practical application into theoretical understanding provided intellectual resources for subsequent development across fields ranging from engineering to economics. Medical understanding incorporating both empirical observation and theoretical systematization established healthcare approaches that would evolve through subsequent refinement, while maintaining fundamental conceptual continuity. These scientific traditions, though developing differently from Western counterparts, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of natural phenomena within distinctive conceptual frameworks. The religious synthesis emerging during this period established patterns that would characterize subsequent spiritual development throughout East Asian civilization. State-sponsored ritual practices derived from ancient traditions provided a framework for public religious observance connected with political authority. Family-centered ancestral veneration practices established religious continuity at the household level, transcending political disruption or doctrinal change. Diverse beliefs regarding supernatural beings, cosmic forces, and afterlife possibilities coexisted within a relatively tolerant environment, allowing multiple religious expressions. The introduction of Buddhism during Eastern Han, though initially peripheral, established a presence for a tradition that would subsequently transform the religious landscape while adapting to existing cultural patterns. This religious complexity, balancing official cult with family practice, philosophical sophistication with popular devotion, created a distinctive spiritual environment characterizing subsequent development. The social organization patterns established during this period demonstrated similar longevity despite significant modification through subsequent historical developments. Family structures emphasizing patrilineal descent, hierarchical relationships, and multi-generational solidarity provided social stability transcending political disruption. Local community organizations balancing governmental administration with self-regulatory functions created resilient social infrastructure adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining basic irrational continuity. Status distinctions evolved from earlier aristocratic models toward more fluid arrangements based on combinations of birth, wealth, education, and official position, creating social mobility pathways within a hierarchical framework. These social patterns, though subsequently modified through internal evolution and external influence, maintained recognizable continuity across diverse historical contexts. Diplomatic frameworks and foreign relations patterns established during this period similarly influenced subsequent development far beyond the immediate historical context. The tributary system conceptualizing external relationships through ritual submission, trade privileges, and cultural exchange provided a flexible framework accommodating diverse interactions from genuine subordination to purely symbolic acknowledgement. Border management strategies, balancing military defense, diplomatic engagement, and cultural interaction, established approaches for managing relations with nomadic peoples that would characterize subsequent dynastic policies with appropriate modifications. These diplomatic frameworks, though evolving significantly through changing power relationships and cultural contacts, maintained conceptual continuity, providing an interpretive structure for understanding external relationships throughout imperial history. The geographic extent of cultural influence established during this formative period created patterns that would characterize subsequent East Asian civilization. Core territories, directly administered through imperial bureaucracy, established regions where cultural integration reached its greatest depth. Peripheral regions with significant non-Chinese populations experienced varying degrees of cultural influence while maintaining distinctive identities beyond imperial boundaries. Surrounding states, including Korean kingdoms, Japanese archipelago polities, and Vietnamese territories, selectively adopted aspects of this cultural complex while maintaining indigenous traditions. The resulting cultural sphere transcended political boundaries while acknowledging significant variation, creating a distinctive civilizational zone characterized by shared elements including literary Chinese, Confucian social ethics, bureaucratic governance models, and agricultural techniques adapted to local conditions. These diverse legacies collectively created a civilizational framework, demonstrating extraordinary continuity across millennia despite significant transformation through both internal evolution and external influence. The bureaucratic empire established through Qin innovation and Han modification would re-emerge following each period of fragmentation, most notably under Sui and Tang. Following nearly 4 centuries of division, the Confucian legalist synthesis would repeatedly reassert itself as a governance framework, reaching particular sophistication during Shang before experiencing significant transformation under Mongol and Manchu conquest dynasties that nevertheless maintained fundamental institutional patterns. Economic organizations, technological systems, and social structures, established during this formative period. These elements similarly demonstrated remarkable continuity despite periodic disruption and gradual transformation. This continuity should not suggest stagnation or lack of development. Each reunification following periods of division incorporated significant innovations emerging during fragmentation. Each dynasty implemented distinctive policies addressing contemporary challenges while consciously invoking historical precedents. Technological advancement continued through gradual improvement rather than revolutionary transformation. Cultural expressions evolved through creative engagement with established traditions rather than wholesale rejection. The resulting pattern demonstrated evolutionary development within established frameworks rather than revolutionary discontinuity, creating a distinctive historical trajectory. Balancing conservation and innovation across an exceptionally long time span. The modern transformation of this civilizational pattern, beginning in the 19th century and accelerating through the 20th, represents unprecedented discontinuity compared with previous transitions that had maintained fundamental institutional and cultural continuity despite significant modification. The revolutionary rejection of imperial governance, Confucian social ethics, and traditional cultural expressions during 20th century modernization efforts created a more profound rupture than any previous historical transition. Yet even this revolutionary transformation demonstrates continuing influence from patterns established during the formative period examined in this historical overview. Contemporary governance structures, though ideologically distinct from imperial predecessors, maintain centralized bureaucratic administration, descending directly from Qin Han innovations. Social relationships, though dramatically transformed through revolutionary change, continue reflecting distinctive patterns established during formative historical development. The extraordinary longevity of patterns established during this formative period raises profound historical questions regarding institutional resilience, cultural continuity, and civilizational development. Why did Chinese imperial institutions repeatedly reconstitute themselves following periods of fragmentation that might have produced permanent divisions similar to post-Roman Europe? How did cultural frameworks maintain coherence across diverse regions despite significant linguistic and environmental variation? What factors enabled evolutionary adaptation within established patterns rather than revolutionary rejection across 2 millennia of historical development? These questions transcend mere historical curiosity to address fundamental issues concerning human social organization, cultural transmission, and institutional development across extended time frames. One compelling explanation emphasizes distinctive geographical conditions shaping historical development. The relatively isolated North China Plain, protected by mountain ranges, deserts, and oceans, created a natural context for political unification, compared with more fragmented European geography. Extensive river systems facilitated transportation and communication essential for administrative integration across vast territories. Agricultural productivity supported large populations, providing both tax revenues sustaining governmental operations and military manpower, enabling territorial control. These geographical advantages facilitated imperial reconstitution following periods of fragmentation, creating a recurrent pattern of division followed by reunion under modified institutional frameworks maintaining fundamental continuity with earlier models. Another perspective emphasizes ideological factors maintaining civilizational coherence despite political disruption. The comprehensive Confucian ethical system provided a normative framework influencing social relationships, political expectations, and educational priorities, transcending particular governmental arrangements. The sophisticated historical consciousness maintained through systematic record-keeping created a shared understanding of past developments, shaping contemporary expectations. Literary tradition using a standardized written language enabled communication across linguistically diverse regions while providing shared cultural references. These ideological factors maintained civilizational coherence through periods of political fragmentation that might otherwise have produced permanent cultural divergence, facilitating subsequent reunification under institutional frameworks consciously invoking historical precedents. The ancient foundations examined throughout this historical overview thus continue influencing contemporary developments despite unprecedented discontinuities created through modern transformation. The institutional patterns, intellectual frameworks, social organizations, and cultural expressions established during formative historical development continue shaping contemporary experience through both direct continuity and reactive opposition. Understanding these ancient patterns provides essential perspective for comprehending subsequent historical development across 2 millennia while illuminating distinctive features of contemporary society, still reflecting influences from formative experiences despite revolutionary transformation. This remarkable combination of continuity and change, conservation and innovation, tradition and adaptation, characterizes the extraordinary civilizational achievement emerging from the historical developments examined throughout this analysis.